My fault.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the May 2024 FMDiSC meeting. We've got a pretty nice agenda today. We're going to have a little requirements gathering, sort of a best practices panel of a number of people. We expect full participation from the audience as well with any insights. We're going to have the normal deployment of Chris Moyer, and doing his tech news roundup is going to be replaced by a newsreel. Chris is out of pocket today, so we had him record this a few days ago, and hopefully that will work well. We'll then do some breakout rooms and a break, come back with some announcements, a little housekeeping and such, and then we're going to get a special treat. Mark Richman's going to reprise his session on using graphics and images and visualizations in all of what we do. So I'm looking forward to that as well. So to start, I think I'm going to just kind of roll it open right now with our esteemed panel, if you will. We've got Bob Shockey from Alchemy Group. We've got Dina Torok from Data Mavens. We're going to have Steve Abrahamson from FileMaker Monster kind of knocking on the door any minute now. But again, feel free to kind of raise your hand or type your questions or pop in if you want, because we're going to kind of go over a number of things related to discovery, that initial point, right? How do we sit down with that client, capture what they need so that we know what the heck we're building? All right, everybody ready?
Yep.
So we've kind of put together a loose list of questions, and I'm sure we're going to kind of crawl around in a bunch of different ways. But one of the questions is, how do you prepare for discovery? Hey, you shake the hands, the customer says, great, we're interested in working with you. What's that next step look like? And I'm gonna pester my good friend Bob Shockey with that question first. Bob, what do you do? Do you do anything before discovery, or just bring a pad of paper with you and start capturing stuff?
No, we like to. I like to. I like to give them homework right out of the gate. I like to let them know that this is a participatory kind of thing, and not just show up for a meeting and start answering questions, because there's more. So I usually ask them to document their business type and industry. Sometimes it's really obvious, but sometimes how they think about their company and their industry is maybe a little bit different from what you might assume. And I really want them to document what their goals are and their primary pain points, again, with their own voice, and who the key stakeholders are, who are the people who are going to be most affected by this, who are the people who are most interested in having a new system. Any documentation they have, like spreadsheets that they're currently using to manage their information, org charts, process diagrams if they have them, wish lists, they almost always have those. I want to know what current tech they're using, what apps they're using now, that they may want to integrate with or retain as part of their process. If there's any kind of API kind of stuff we're going to be doing, then I want them to give me some kind of a heads up on that before we get started, because that's going to have a big impact on the project as a whole. And and then if we have any prior projects that work in the same industry, then we might go back and review what we know from those, just to help us have a better understanding of what they're doing from the get-go. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot. I don't think you can just walk in and say, okay, let's just have a meeting and get started. That'll work, but I think you can do a lot more.
Yeah, that's well said. I like that you're capturing a lot of stuff, the people we want to work with, the stuff that's important to you. What are you currently using? Those are all really good ingredients for kind of setting that base layer of knowledge for you. Dina, any things that you do for yourself, things that you ask your customers to do before you get rolling?
Yeah, I just walk in. No, I'm kidding. But I generally, I'm going to review the customer's website, although I guess hopefully will have done that before the first contact, the first telephone contact. But I just make sure I review what their particular business is about, or at least how they present it to the world. So that's the research I do on them. I don't generally research the industry separately from their website that I can remember, but I guess that's a possibility too. I also will review anything that I know if I've worked in a similar industry. And then I do ask them to have in hand put together any, not so much documentation, but let's say forms, if they're still using anything on paper, or reports that they may be trying to emulate or replace. I want to see what they're already doing, at least some of what they're already doing. Occasionally a customer will want to.
Hey there, what's going on?
Oops, you're off, Stephen. Hey.
Yeah,
Steven.
please mute if you're not speaking, guys.
I expected it to be so quick. And my event request link is not.
Stephen.
I'm gonna mute him.
Thanks. Okay. Oh yeah, especially obviously with existing clients on a new project, I'll have access to their system already, but new clients will sometimes want to send me a copy or get me access into their system to review it ahead of time. And I have said yes to that. So, I work with mostly smaller clients, most of whom aren't too worried about security so much. And so I have said yes to looking into a system just briefly, but I don't want to put too much time into it before we're actually meeting and talking. So, and obviously you could spend hours and hours looking into a system. So I've kind of looked just to get a real overview, high level overview of what they're working with currently, if they're in FileMaker.
Yeah, you raised an interesting question too, Dina, with am I doing discovery with a new customer? Completely different set of criteria than if you're working on a new module or a new enhancement with an existing.
For sure. Yeah. And right. So obviously with an existing customer, you likely have your contacts already, but sometimes it's a new department or a new, new team in the customer organization. So anyway, I don't do a whole lot, certainly not like Bob does, not that much. I'll go in with, if I'm in person, which is of course very rare these days, I'm coming in with my computer, but I'm actually still, well, I guess maybe I'm jumping ahead, but I'm taking notes there with paper and pen still. But I usually meet with even new customers now on Zoom, and then I'm got my notes off to the side that I take notes on. So might be jumping ahead. Yeah.
One of the it's funny because I do at Angel City, we try to do kind of a blend of a lot of the things I'm hearing you folks generally on the sales. If I'm going, I'm meeting with Acme, I'm going up on LinkedIn. Do I know anybody there? Anybody who used to work there? Do I have friends of a friends? Or I'm trying to look for that connecting tissue between me and them that helps, if at all. But also to kind of learn a little bit about their industry, read their posts if they have anything. And then obviously another really quick tip for those that don't know, you can go to ChatGPT and say, go summarize this entire website in 50 or 100 words, and you can get a really good little synopsis without having to hit every single tab on every page. But generally, I'll go look at the website if it's not too extensive. But ChatGPT does a really nice job of just going, this is what they do. They're leaders in this, and they make these things, and they sell them that way. But we generally, who are they? What do they do? What kind of industry? All those same things. Our sort of, when the customer says ready to go, and the point we make to them, number one, we want to hit the ground running. And number two, we want to save you money. So here's some homework, and that same thing that Bob said. The other thing that from a sales standpoint, if you have a relationship where you're just going, hey, we're going to keep bringing carpet swatches out, and hopefully we're going to move the furniture around, and you like it. When you get some engagement with the customer, I think it really helps, that little bit of tension. So when you go, you don't want to go, hey, show me every single screen of every single system you've ever used. I don't want to give them a burdensome thing before they show up for the first meeting. But we break it down into 3 things. What's your wish list? And I'm talking 10, 15 items, and I give them examples. We want to use less paper. We want less. We have 12 systems right now. We'd like to get that down to 4 or 5. And I give that example generally to the decision maker because I go, I want to know your business outcomes. We're looking to, improve our flow, or our sales process takes 12 days now. We'd like to get that cut in half. That's the kind of stuff I'm looking for from a business standpoint. So I'll give that to the boss. And it is something like Bob said, most of the time they can almost kind of rattle this stuff off. And then I go, number 2, what are you putting stuff into? I want to see data entry. I want to see screens, Excel, your existing apps. Grab me screen grabs. I don't care. It doesn't have to be a big formal thing. Just give me some screen grabs of 4 or 5 of the apps you guys are currently using. that shows us immediately, oh, they're doing Mr. David A. Knight Sr. or whatever. We get a sense of how granular their data is, how they use it, what data is important. Saves us a lot of time. So get us screens and such of anything you're using, pictures of your paper forms, et cetera. And then third, what do you produce with the system? Oh, here's what an invoice looks like. Oh, we have a mail merge that goes out. Oh, we generate this quarterly report. So what are we going to extract from the system? The other thing that Bob said, what are the other systems you're using? Super valuable. That's super valuable to know. Hey, we've got Sage on the back end for our accounting package. Great, that's what we know is a target for API pushes. The other question I like is, I really want to discern this when they talk about all those systems. What do you hate? What do you love? I want to know what you love, because the last thing in the world I want to do is come in here and destroy something that's perfect for them already that I got no business monkeying with, right? So from that standpoint, I like to be very cognizant of, let's not over improve things if somebody's happy. Any other thoughts in the audience here about, things you want to do prior to really starting to capture the needs? Anybody else have ideas or suggestions? Well then.
My simple one I'd throw out there, and I know it was mentioned at the top, but I don't think it can be overstated, is to come with a curious mind and a willingness to ask really stupid questions. There's a book called, I think it's called Getting Naked by Patrick Lencioni, if I'm not misremembering it, but it's a fable about a consulting company, but that was like a main message I took away, is like, ask the dumb questions in the room. Don't be afraid to. It's amazing how much will be revealed as they try to explain it to a third grader, how simple maybe their processes are, their needs are, that they haven't expressed yet because they've given you all the detail because they're so close to it. They can't see the big picture. And those simple questions, that willingness to be brave, is really powerful.
That's excellent. Yeah, and there's a real exercise. A lot of the time this happens in the sales process, sometimes in discovery, but there's a real art to go and grab the boss. You guys started in a garage and now here you are, right? Everybody has that story. Give me that story. And they go, well, what we really need is a purchase order system. I'm like, no. Tell me the story, who you are, how you got here. Let's get an arc in a relatively simple fashion. So my little brain, I sit in front of dozens of customers doing this, and it's like, I really want to get a sense of who you guys are, what you guys do in a simple fashion. So I think that asking those simple questions, Mark, I think that's a real good way to make sure you kind of extract that. So Bob, you talked about the kind of people Dina, yeah, go.
Tony has his hand raised.
Oh, Tony. Hey, Tony, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. Hey, thanks. For the two phases, discovery and the one before it, which is kind of like they're knocking on the door and they're not sure.
Yeah.
We have, perhaps not surprisingly, an infographic that we send out that has 8 things. I'm just gonna platform. I say, they say, how much will it cost? I say, how many platforms we're talking? We're talking desktop, mobile, and web. That would be more than desktop alone. Dave, you mentioned screen sizes. I like to pin that down early. I mentioned ER diagram is something that we'll probably be talking with them about. I realize that's a little bit techy. Just want to emotionally prepare them for the possibility that we're going to have to do some thinking ahead of time. Number 4, network diagram. I say, look, most of the time it doesn't matter, but if it's a big client, we might have to kind of visualize their network because FileMaker runs on top of the network. Homework, 2 people mentioned it. I'll chime in. I'll pile on. This is a good way to find out if they're serious. Give them a homework assignment, like you guys said. You should give me a punch list. Don't make it a novel. 1 page, 2 page, 3 at most. What are you looking for? Process flows. I tell them that don't matter most of the time. Application integration, it was mentioned by Bob. And I think it's like, what are they using and what might they use? I like to showcase that FileMaker is really good at talking to others. That kind of sells the platform a bit. And that, would fit if they haven't committed, is like, hey, look what you could do. I like what was said is like, what are you already doing? Put the pieces of the puzzle together. Finally, privileges. I like to let them know early on that at some point you might have to sort out your privileges because that seems to be something difficult. So I give them, at least start to think about what are the roles. And that is a thing we send out. It's how to spec a FileMaker app, and we find that useful.
Yeah, those are all useful tools. And as you just said, Tony, in a larger organization, you want to talk about network. If you're going into a mom and pop shop, they're not gonna,
Yeah.
So those are different blades on the Swiss Army knife, and sometimes you need them all, and sometimes you use just a few.
Absolutely.
I see we have Mr. Steve Abrahamson here. I'm going to throw one at him, just curveball right at him. So one of the things that we just kind of touched on a few seconds ago, Steve, is Bob was talking about, I like to make sure who are the people that I'm going to have in this. So when you're getting ready to do discovery, hey, we got the customer, they signed, we're ready to get started. What's the personnel look like sitting opposite you from that process? What are you looking for?
I think it really depends on the type of client and the size of the client. I really like to have the people, or at least a representative smattering of the people who actually do the work, the people who are actually doing this stuff in the trenches. Because oftentimes you get a manager who's got a rosy idea, but they don't actually use the tools that are there. They don't know the points of pain. They don't know the inefficiencies. And you got to hear it straight from the horse's mouth. You got to hear it firsthand, not second or third, to really get, what, I hate to use the term, but to get what you need to fix.
Yeah. Dina, who do you like to see across the table from you?
Yeah, sometimes I'm working with the owner directly, because I generally, again, work with very small companies, and sometimes the owner is either the only person or just has a small company and they know what they want to be in charge. And mostly in the past, they wanted to, help make dev changes as well. So try to keep that in the past, but I'm open to that still. I'm that kind of person that can deal with that, because if they break it, then, and I need to fix it, then I'll fix it. They're paying. That's kind of older systems though. And then definitely I usually do work with people in the trenches, and they're either the heads of their teams, if they're a very small team, or they're just the basic team members themselves. So yeah, on the larger companies or organizations that I've worked with, it's heads of teams, I would say.
Yeah. The other thing I find, I think we've all made that mistake of building for the owner, and then they try to hand it downstream, and everybody says, we don't work this way, right? So that's never good. You also want to build for the agenda. That's why at the first meeting, what are we trying to get done? What are the wish list items? And if the boss is setting an agenda, then we make sure that everybody we were talking with, their needs meet the needs of the overall strategic stuff. Those are all sort of things. The other thing I'm looking for, especially if we get into a good sized organization, I'm looking for the person that's been there 20 years, very operations, know this thing soup to nuts. I love having a couple of those. I love having the new person. We got a new vice president, and he's coming from somewhere else. We've used really good systems. What we're using right here is junk, or whatever we're doing right now. So that agent of change is also sometimes nice to have. And then the champion, the person in the room who is going, this is fantastic. We've got another need for this in another department. You want to find that person in the project, just from a long-term relationship building and so forth. That's always kind of nice too.
Dave, I have a
Dave,
follow.
Yeah,
go ahead, Lynn.
Talking about all these different people with different roles, I find it less efficient to have all those people in the room at the same time. I like to have smaller meetings.
Yeah.
Yes, with the owner and maybe team leads, but then also separately with the end users, the people in the trenches, because they may have issues they're not bringing up with their bosses. They struggle at times to accomplish their jobs, but they don't want that known up the organization chart. And I see it as my role to take all of these differing needs and reconcile them without having to go sit through, and I have sat through a lot of meetings where these different levels of use and expectation have to argue it out in the big meeting. That eats up a lot of time for everybody. It's my job to recognize and take these conflicting desires and say, well, I've heard this to the other person, and get their take and kind of work out the reconciliation kind of as a matchmaker or a go-between.
Yeah, to distill and merge, right? All of those things. You're right. And I don't think anybody likes to have, the kickoff meeting is great for agenda and excitement and introductions and all that. But yeah, you're right, Lynn. I think breaking people off, by department area and then having those meetings individually can be much more productive than the bickering and agendizing and so forth.
Dave, I use that word champion a lot with my clients. They like that word. It works well. It describes exactly what we're looking for very easily. And so I'll say, you have to identify a champion on your side. This is the person who's always going to be, and it's really, it's your project manager, right? But it's the person who's going to be there for every meeting, even if we're meeting with other people. You got to have that continuity, and this person is going to end up knowing that system inside and out long before it's deployed, because they're there, talking about all the features, about what button does what, where, and how the data is structured and so forth. They learn a lot as they go along. And sometimes it's the business owner if it's a really small company, but a lot of times when I put it in those terms, that it kind of opens up their mind to, well, maybe so-and-so, the general manager, would be a better person to do this, or which, we love working with general managers. They're great because they're a little more down to earth and they're more tapped into what's going on. Or department heads, are really good too. But just that whole idea that word champion is a very powerful word.
Yeah.
Because it immediately puts the person in the position of, okay, I am in charge of making this successful. I'm the champion. I'm the one who's going to drive this thing forward. It's all on me now because I'm the champion.
Yeah, they're your embassy in that other country, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Stephen Blackwell, you have your hand raised.
Yes, not every case, not every time, but I do like to check with the IT people, whether they're in-house IT or more often in smaller companies, outsourced IT contractors, basically for two reasons. One, to let them know I am not a threat to them. And secondly, to find out what type of infrastructure support they're giving the prospective client, particularly in terms of FileMaker server, network capabilities, and things like that. As I said, not every case, not every time historically, but I'd say 3 times out of 4.
Nice.
Hey, Stephen, how do you establish that you're not a threat to IT?
Have you seen him?
There you go. Perfect.
I'm trying to distill it for the rest of us who don't have his innate abilities.
By explaining to them that I'm really not there to usurp their role, by asking them is there anything I can do in the construction of the system to help them and things like that. It's a sensory and intuitive type approach rather than a checklist of items. Happens to fit well with my personality type, or so the Myers-Briggs people tell me, and that's just the way that I go.
So I want to move on to, these are all really great add-ons in terms of who do we have sitting across from us and why, and there are motivations to that too. One tiny thing I always like to add too, bringing people in from these different departments. We have so many users that do not like change. And if you make them a part of the process, you bring Max in from shipping, he goes, I hate these systems. You bring him in, you get his needs, you find out how you can make a problem of his go away. He's now a champion for his department. So when you deploy this thing, Max is walking around going, hey, this is the system that I helped build. You need that. Sometimes you need that political foothold in each department and so forth. But from Dina, from a standpoint of, okay, I'm going to sit down in our first meeting. I've got their documents together. I've got some of their wish list items. I know who the people are I'm talking with. How do you handle this? Do you just go, hey, the phone rings at your business and then you create an order and then an invoice and then a shipment? Or do you want to hear this in a linear fashion? Do you want to nibble around the edges of problems? Do you want to get into the worst, gnarliest, biggest, hairiest part? Where do you tackle that?
I am a listener by nature, so I like to let them talk for a while to see what they have to say. Are they going to tell me, they're going to tell me their struggles or the problems they have, and or they're going to tell me what they're interested in. It kind of shows me their perspective and what's most important to them. And then, I'll intermittently, ask them questions and to try to get more detail, or at some point I'll try to guide them into a different part of the discussion. I don't have a really specific track.
Structured.
Structure, yeah. So I'm kind of go with the flow. But at some point, there's my questions start focusing on things I need to know, whether it's entities or workflow or whatever it is that we haven't touched on. But I'll let them talk for a while.
And then do you, once they've aired those Festivus grievances, if you will, do you sit there and go, we've also got that wish list or some items here, and you're listening? Do you go, it seems to me that this is a real big thing and we want to start there? How do you pivot into where you're going to start leading them in the discussion?
Again, not too structured, just, being in this for whatever it is, 26 years, or I'm not counting, really. Less than the rest of you or some of you, but I think it's just, what do I do? I think I just feel it out, but I also like to drop in a lot of times what, the capabilities. Well, we can do this. FileMaker can do this. Did you know now we can do this that we couldn't have done maybe 5-10 years ago, whatever, a few years ago, even though you've been using FileMaker for 25 years, and that's fun to add in because it opens their eyes or, their minds up a little bit to things they hadn't thought about because they just didn't know that their systems could do something. Maybe it impresses them a little bit, but so I do like to kind of bring up the ideas of what can we do that's maybe beyond what they'd been thinking when they called.
It's what makes you a problem solver, right? At that point. Bob, same question. Where do you tend to start, if anywhere?
I really like to do a very linear process-driven kind of discovery. So, and that's a really nice way to divide things up, because then I can look at a process and go, okay, so now it's moving into this department. Who are the key stakeholders in that department? And can we talk to those people about what happens next and how they rely on this data pipeline that's coming to them? And then usually I find out that there's stuff missing from that first part of the process that was described, and I'm able to kind of get a more holistic view. And that's sort of part of the philosophy of how we do things. We have a very much user process kind of mentality about all of this. What are you expecting to see? How are you going to use this data? What's important to you about this? What are your goals using this data for your particular microcosm within this company, for your department? What are the main pain points of those things now that we can solve? It's always important to find out those pain points in the process, like, oh, I have to do all this extra stuff when I'm doing this. I have to do all this copy and paste from one app to another, or whatever it is they're doing, so that we can reassure them that, okay, we're going to solve that. That's actually going to be really easy to solve. It's going to be part of it. We're going to take all these steps out and make your job a lot easier. That's part of how you get those champions you were talking about earlier, Dave. People who are converts to, oh, I can't wait for this system to get deployed, where they may have been dreading it before. So, and it's essential too. So, I like to start at like kind of what I call 20,000 foot view, right? Give me, in this first meeting, I want to know everything from start to finish that you guys accomplish. Okay, now I have a framework. Now I can go and start drilling down on those things deeper and deeper, and it's just kind of an iterative process like that. But yeah, definitely process and user driven.
Yeah, if you've done what we all talk about, we've identified the people, we've got some forms, some agenda items, and so forth. If they do that 20,000 foot view, you can start saying, oh, and this is the form this is what you use for the quotes, and this is what you guys are using for your orders, and these are the people in the orders department you just introduced me to. You're starting to kind of acclimate and getting ready for that. It sounds also like you and Dina also like to reward them with candy. Oh, we can solve that, and we've got a great idea for that. I think that's important. I think that's clever to instill wins, even at that early stage, as you're just getting warmed up to them, giving confidence to them that you've got this, I got it, we've got this, we know how to do this, and we're going to be able to make that better. I think that's great. Steve, I got a question for you. I've known you for a long time. You know, I don't want to say you specifically. Most of us are pretty meticulous at what we do. We build software systems, but you've always gotten a lot of thought around what you do. What are the tools, or how do you capture those needs? Do you have any specific tools, or is it just a legal pad and a pencil? Or what are you doing to kind of help collect, organize, and kind of share some of this stuff?
Oh man. Geez, I feel like I want to talk about what everyone else was just talking about first.
Go ahead, weigh in.
I mean, the where I start is like the main thing. Like when you're done with the sales thing, before you get to the DNA, you know, the analysis stuff, you've got an idea of what the main thing of this project is, right? Yeah, okay, you know, I know why I'm going here. These guys need this thing. And that's what I start with. And then, you know, as you go through, all these tributaries and branches start to reveal themselves, and you just start, you know, making notes to come back to this thing, come back to this thing, and come back to this thing. But that, you know, just start with that, the main nugget, and go from there. And I try to instill in people before I get there, think in terms of functionality, don't think in terms of features. You know, I want to be able to share this information with a customer, as opposed to, you know, I need a button that gives me a PDF that gives me blah, 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 right? Encourage them as much as possible to start to detach from the concrete before we even get to that meeting. Helps a lot. My process, I mean, yeah, not a legal pad, because those pages are too long, but a regular pad, and pen and lots of paper, and I just write and take notes and scribble stuff out and rewrite it when, you know, when 5 minutes later it turns out, no, that's actually not the way that works, or should work, or could work. And I just listen, because like 90% of it is just distilling the forest from the trees, and they're all in the trees.
Yeah, that's good. Bob, I know you've played around with various note gathering tools and so forth. What are you using currently? What's the tool of the month for you at the moment?
Well, full disclosure, I think this is a good time to point out that when it comes to discovery, I'm sort of like the kickoff guy, and maybe, you know, I'll drop in once in a while on the meetings. Most of the time I'm not running discovery. I'm not there for every meeting. That's not my role anymore in the company. But really, it's what we do is it's whatever works for you. So things that have been used, you know, Logseek, Evernote, Bear, those are all like, you know, online, like, you know, note-taking apps that sync, you know, across devices and so forth. Bear's my favorite right now. Used to be Evernote. Mark on our team uses Audio Note, which is great because every note you type gets a timestamp, and so you can sync that up with your Zoom meeting if you're using that. The tools that Zoom gives us, since most of our meetings are over Zoom these days, are great because it's got not only the AI summary, which, you know, it's not perfect yet, but it also gives you a transcript if you have that turned on, which is searchable. So if you want to go back and, you know, you don't want to like go, you know, try to go through the video of the meeting, the video recording of the meeting, you can instead search that transcript for search terms or words that you know were used, and you can actually find that stuff a lot faster. And then that will also point you to what part of the meeting recording to go to. So that's been really useful. But lately what we started using, and we did buy a subscription for everybody in the company for this, is it's called Stories on Board, which is like a user journey mapping tool. And that really fits in with that process driven kind of discovery that we were talking about earlier, because it gives you a way to kind of, you know, create kind of, it's not a Kanban, but it gives you these little boxes that you put, you know, parts of the process in, and you can be very linear with it. But then below that, you can drill down with more and more notes below that. So it gives you this sort of grid-like organizational structure that's really nice. So we just started using that, and we're really hopeful that that's going to be really useful. So, you know, and I always do take notes, although even those I'm using a digital device because I'm using a, I don't know if you can see it. A lot of times when I hold it up, it just kind of disappears, but it's a Remarkable tablet, which is like just a digital tablet, digital notebook. And that can be really useful too, because, well, I don't really use it. It can turn your notes into text, and it does a pretty good job of it, but mine come out all caps because of the way I write in block letters. So it looks like I'm yelling all the time. But you know, all that stuff, you know, you can save them as PDFs just as they look too, which is great because I can just hand them off to my team for further transcription into our systems. And ultimately everything ends up in our systems. So we have a FileMaker internal system that's really pretty sophisticated these days, and it follows a whole ISO spec and so forth for requirements gathering, which I can talk about later if you want. But
Hey, Bob?
yeah.
You mentioned like Kanban systems and stuff like that. Are you saying that your people are actually capturing in the meeting live into a Kanban system?
No.
That's not. Oh, okay. So what's
No,
their direct capture?
I mean, Trello might be a good tool for that, but no, I was talking about stories on board being kind of Kanban-like, but it's not really. I mean, you can kind of organize things a little bit, but that's not what it's there for. It's more like a way to document a process and be able to capture as much detail as you want about it without muddying it up too much.
If I can share, it's a story mapping tool that is similar to what you would do if you were doing something on the wall with sticky notes, like horizontal and vertical. When I do my presentation later, I've got some pictures, and I'll stop there, Steve, and show out that are specific examples of story mapping using stories on board, and also one which is showing sticky notes on the wall so you can compare them next to each other.
Okay, cool.
But you can really get good at it. I think, Bob, you know, in real time, people can learn to be super fast while they're talking, and actually just like sticky notes, even faster than sticky notes, throwing them up with whatever detail is needed and moving them around to kind of encapsulate the process, the story that someone tells you about how they work and want to work.
Yeah, we my favorite, you know, old school or otherwise, first and foremost, I'm jotting stuff on. John Sindler and I always kind of line up on this legal pad, man. I'm just jamming on notes and capturing stuff. I'm not doing that. You know what? I'm not sharing that with the customers. Sometimes I'm letting them look over my pad if we're in the same room. Nothing beats a whiteboard, man. Oh man, when I'm sitting in front of a customer and I can draw that timeline and show the different. We're here, and what about this? And let's draw a sample screen that'll allow you to do this. No, that's not going to work. Erase it. You can do stuff so fast and nimble in real time. We do have Trello integrated with, you know, we have a time job tracking monster system as well. We call it Pegasus, and it's we've got Trello integration, and there are times, rarely, but there are times we can get a customer that really wants to go, yeah, we're going to have an order module, and they want to see this in the course of a meeting. They want to see this on a Kanban style board. So we can do that in Trello, and it shows up in FileMaker as sort of, you know, bullet point areas, and then kind of flesh it out with our tools. So that's sort of the next question. Or I see. Let's have Lynn. Lynn's got a comment.
Okay, I wanted to follow up on Bob's linear process. I learned probably too recently, it's never too late to draw a flow chart. I've had problems finding a flow charting software that I liked, and I found online Miro, Miro.com. They have you can get a couple of charts for free. Remarkably good user interface. It was so easy and intuitive, and I made some fairly sophisticated flow charts for a really messy process for my customer. And I just thought, you know, I should have been doing this much earlier in the whole process. It helps to visualize.
Yeah, that's really good to get a new breed. I like several people in the chat are talking about OmniGraffle and some others that have been around. There's a number of those tools. And again, Mark's going to have some thoughts on this entire area too. My other question to the other panelists, you know, one of the things that we also do, we go, hey, we can do this with Trello. But if somebody comes to us and says, oh, we're using Notion or, ClickUp or Jira or whatever, we tend to be chameleons. We're like, yeah, well, we use whatever, tool set the corporate, entities want. If it's a small mom and pop, sometimes we won't even do, we don't even want to encroach them in Trello. They're like, oh my God, it's technology, it's so hard. And we're like, no, you can just look and see. And but what other tools do you use to share what you're doing? Are we just doing Word documents back and forth, or do we have any sort of interactive, collaborative things that we're doing with the customers in the discovery phase? Dina, how about you?
Well, after years ago trying to create my own database and then getting stuck, as I called the project the shoemaker's shoes.
Yeah, we all have that.
It was awesome halfway through, and that's where it remains. So a number of years ago, I adopted Asana, and I found that was great to just use somebody else's. And so I'll use Asana for my own project management. And when I was working, or when I occasionally do now work with teams of my own teams, then I'll get them on Asana. And I've shared some of those projects with some clients who seem to either be interested, or they're more complex projects, or I'm building more from scratch, whatever it is. So I've shared specific projects or teams, with clients and with subcontractors. Other clients just insist a lot on the email back and forth. I don't have, a system to really, sorry, this is embarrassing, but I represent the solopreneur, but at least some of us, but I don't have a good system to track requests. Generally it's still coming in on email, and then I move it over. So I am working back and forth with email to communicate back and forth, especially when we're with clients who aren't on Asana. And I'm open to other systems, but I don't think I've had a client that has asked me to use their system, or maybe I did a few years ago, but that's easy enough. And occasionally use the ER, I've used OmniGraffle for ERDs, and I'll put in, well, I don't know if we're in proposals, but I'm doing Word docs back and forth and emails, and sometimes, but what I will do is if I've got a project that I'm tracking in Asana, I'll PDF that or share it in one way or another if they're not on Asana with me.
Got it. And Steve, do you use any sort of shareable application, or are you just kind of handing them the final results, or how are you working with them in that capacity?
With long-term customers, I've had stuff in Asana that's like, when we get to V2 of this feature, but we're going to use this as a place to like toss ideas and then sort of distill them and then come up with a list of features. But when I'm doing the analysis for like a new customer, I just want my hand in a piece of paper, and I don't want anything to interrupt my flow because I want to pay attention to them and what they're saying. So in that sense, no.
Yeah. You have to be careful of what you don't want to show the sausage being made, as it were, at certain points in the process either, right?
No, well, of course, yeah. But my concern there is just I don't want to be distracted by the technology and not listen to them. I just want to, scribble it down, keep going, make a note, keep going. I don't have to worry about learning their tech or wait, hang on a second, I need to just get the, and then, you're out of the flow.
Yeah. Bob, you're using some Kanban stuff, internal systems. Do you have platforms that you're using to share and sort of collaborate in real time with the customer on stuff for the discovery phase?
Not in real time, no. I mean, beyond maybe the tools in Zoom, maybe do a little sketch or something like that. But no, most of it's something that we would rather take a little time with, OmniGraffle, Figma, Balsamic, we used to use more. We don't use it as much anymore. Stories on Board is collaborative, but we're mainly collaborating. The idea is to collaborate with each other on that.
Right.
Another tool that I do use sometimes with clients, especially if they're really concerned about timeline and delivery time, is Monday.com is a good tool for establishing a timeline and the different phases of the project and giving them a picture of how we're thinking about how we're going to deliver the project. That's just a very small part of what Monday is capable of doing. We're using just a tiny piece of it, but we do use that. but no, most of it's being done after the fact. We're not doing it in real time.
Yeah, yeah. And I think a lot of tools, Jira, Notion, things like that, I think those are, and Trello, these are great tools to go, where are we at in the process? When you get into development, I think it's really easy to show the customer, hey, we're done with this. Now we're working on this. This is in progress. This has been pushed out to phase 2 and so forth. I think the development process sometimes is a little more beneficial to everybody once you get everything kind of ironed out. So we're all sitting with these customers and we're capturing these needs and we're kind of organizing them by department, by module, by need, by function, by workflow, whatever those things are. So we've got ways of organizing these and get in front of the customer. And then we go, and here's the price, because guess what? It's not free. So one of the things, and by the way, I'm just going to give you a secret of Angel City Data's. One of the things we do, we get the entire spec together. Here is the game plan. There are going to be no numbers on it. We're going to send that to the customer, go, is this what you want? First and foremost, we want them to go, have we missed anything? Is there any sort of gap, or did we misstate something, or so forth? I want them to get comfortable with, this is the floor plan of the house that we're going to design for you. And then we're going to go back and cost out the plumbing, the concrete, the electrical, all that. So we like to go, first tell us if this is what you want. Second, we're going to come back and then throw some numbers on it. So Dina, how do you go about? I mean, in terms of establishing, some people go, well, it's strictly hours, or it's I cost out X amount per screen, or it's value based. This is going to save them $50,000 a year, so I'm going to put a premium on it. Steve, as we were getting ready for this session, we were kicking around ideas. Steve said, what about the pain in the ass factor? What if you have that client is just going to be grinding you through the whole thing? How do you put numbers on stuff, Dina?
Yeah, I think I probably subconsciously put in the PITA.
Yeah.
No, I like the idea of value-based billing, but I've not been able to implement that very much on some projects where I know the client already. I've been working with them already. Sometimes, and on smaller projects, I do try to put like a price without breaking it down into hours, put a price per piece, and not even put what the hourly rate is. But I tend to break it down. Oh, one more thing before I say what I tend to do. I have also found that most of my customers want, more information than just overall, hey, this is an X thousands of dollars project. They want more than that because they want to know where that came from, but they don't want all the detail that
this button,
this relationship, this whatever it is. And I had done that a while back using a system I came across to really, it seemed like it could help to you just put a value on each piece and put it all together, but it was a bit overkill, at least for what I do. And my clients they didn't look through that. They just went to the back. What is that total? So there's that balance in between. So what I try to do is I do break it down in terms of, some basic pieces, which modules, and those are sort of either table-based modules or user interface modules. And then I go with, how much user interface are we talking about? And I do still go with the hourly. What do I think it's going to take? Then I pad each of those, right? So whether I'm padding it, what do I do? 20 or 30%, or is it 2 or 3 times? I don't know. I pad somewhere between 30% and 300% what I think it's going to take. And that I always put in separate pieces for project management, client communications, troubleshooting and testing, changes. Who knows what they're going to be? There will be changes, So I put a whole bunch of those things in so that the clients have the expectation every project there's going to be time for that. It's not just the development. And then I kind of try to pad all of that. And so I'm not being too detailed, but I'm trying to cover the things that we've talked about, what we think the project will be. And then I always state, there's going to be changes. My clients don't know everything that they want when they first talk with me. So we try to stick with a plan, a general plan, and then we know there's going to be updates to that. And then I give them their final cost. But I do have to say, I think at this point, I don't think I'm ahead of myself. My most successful project, in my mind anyway, was turned out to be like I think we had our meeting in August of 2008. So like, what is that, weeks before the big crash back then. I can't say it's my most successful long-term because I've had clients for 15, 20 years. This client I had for a number of years, but they were a nonprofit. They needed a budget, right? They needed an exact budget and they kind of knew what they wanted, but they didn't know exactly. And they needed the budget before we were, we didn't want to get into the specs. They needed to know now how much it's going to cost. And what I put together was a plan, right? We're going to do a specs stage, and then we're going to do, after specs, we're going to do phase 1, and phase 1's going to give you some sort of system that you can start using a little bit, right? So it was really generic and really vague. It didn't say anything that we're going to actually do or deliver. It was just a project outline, and we, I'm probably maybe asked for what their budget might be, but I was sort of guessing at the same time. And the plan looked good to them. We established a relationship. They felt like they could trust me, and we had a specific budget for that next 6 months to a year, whatever it was, and it got approved. And this was awesome because then we got the budget, we got it approved, and then we could go in and do the specs and already know that we're just going to fit in to the project, whatever fits, into the budget. So I try to emulate that. That was the best time that happened because, so anyway, somewhere for me, it's between, it's not too much information, but it's more than just overall number.
We've got
Dina, with what you were describing earlier about kind of like what the client wants to see versus the amount of detail that you might need as a developer is kind of where we ended up. We were looking at the way we were doing things and realized that this is not really the best way to do things, right? And what we were doing was we were speccing out like, here's, here, this table is going to take this long to build, and here's this table and this table and this table, here's this screen, here's this
the
screen,
engineering. Yeah,
it was all the engineering stuff, and it was stuff that we needed to know, and we would put it in plain enough terms so the client could understand it. So we're ending up with something that's a compromise that's not enough for the developer and too much for the client. And so I started looking around, and I think it was Mark that actually said, there's an ISO spec for this. And so I went and I actually found this spec. It's the ISO 29148. And it's called Systems and Software Engineering Lifecycle Processes Requirements Engineering. So it's very exciting reading.
I posted a link to that spec site.
So what we found, obviously, anybody who tries to use everything in an ISO spec is on a fool's errand because they're ridiculously detailed. But there were a lot of nice little tidbits I took out of it, and one of them was, that what you give to your client has to be written in very specific language, like a certain type of language, and it has to be specific enough to tell them what they're going to get, but not too specific. Like, you don't say you're going to get this many screens, that do these things. It's just kind of, you're going to have the ability in this module to get these things done, and certain things that they've spec'd out that, like, it's really important that we have this. Sure, you include that stuff in there, but it's much less descriptive than what the developer is getting. And so I created a system in FileMaker that has two parts to it. One of them is called DFI, developer facing information, and the other part's called CFI, client facing information. And those have to be tied together. So everything in that developer facing information has to be linked to some part of the client facing information. And the DFI is where we get the budget, right? That's where we figure out what the estimate is going to be, because we can look at each one of those things and say, just like we did before, okay, to build this table, it's going to take half an hour to get all the fields in there. Okay, to build this screen, it's going to take 4 hours to build this screen, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? And we can spec that stuff out, and that's telling us how much all those numbers from all those individual pieces add up to for this one paragraph that we've written in the client-facing information. So it's not too long. It's definitely not too technical. It's not so specific that we paint ourselves into a corner on anything, but it is specific enough that the client knows what they're getting. And there's a lot of stuff in that ISO spec about the kind of language that you use. The word shall gets used a lot. Will, not, you shouldn't have things in there like should, could, may. nothing vague, nothing, too like that
Yeah.
ends up promising more than it should, really.
No hand
And,
wavium.
Yeah. We,
What's that?
I said no hand wavium.
yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things we're about to deliver a pretty large system in the next couple of days. And again, we're always tinkering with our, how do we share it? How do we present the dollars and so forth? We've got a really beautiful keynote presentation that's got, a paragraph, 5 or 6 bullet points for a module. Here's the price tag, and here's a link that you click and go up to a Dropbox type of account, and they can look at the PDF of all that deep technical spec and see where we've put numbers on some of those things. So from a quick, breezy, beautiful looking presentation standpoint, the executives are like, this looks wonderful and this is what it costs. What's behind that? Click the button, boom. Oh, I don't need to see all that, but it's there, so both our technical team and the business team can look at that. The other question I have on this, which is really kind of interesting, and Mark runs a good shop, and they have a pretty high volume. And Mark, you're one of the few people I know that actually tell people on your website, like, here's what an average system cost is going to be. Is Mark still here?
Mhm.
I am.
Oh yeah. So you've already kind of preset their expectation on what an average system cost. Obviously, there's going to be caveats to that, but people already know sort of what kind of money outlays they're looking at. Is that correct?
Yeah, and it's amazing. So few of the people we talk to have actually read that, right? It's
Right.
just surprising to me. It's usually, I tell my team that, there's usually 2 numbers I can't get out of that first phone call with. I'm like, Bob, I don't do a lot of the hands-on discovery anymore these days, but I usually am involved in a sort of, how big should discovery be, how it should be priced? Is it a block of hours or is it a fixed fee? What's the kind of scope and scale of what we're going to actually explore? And there's always skin in the game there. But they almost always want, if they're a business owner like any of us, they want to know what they're getting into, right? And you have to give them. I've heard some really good advice from Bob Bowers about this. You almost have to be willing to explore the systems like this can be anywhere from X to Y, right? And a lot's going to depend on what we build and when we build it. And so for me, it's a lot of emphasis on you can wave a magic wand and you'd have everything you want. But what we're going to really do is we're going to come up with an enormous, map on the story. We're going to come up with an enormous backlog of what we could do, and then we're going to prioritize what we should do first.
Right.
And that's
1,
where we have a
phase
lot
2.
more control over that initial spend. We're only going to build. I think, what is it from the story mapping book by Jeff Patton? I think it is there's always more software to build than there is budget to build it. So we're going to have a cutoff. We just don't know where it is yet. Let's together figure out where it is. But we're not in any rush to build all of it. We're trying to build to just the point where the rest is in the not doing pile because you've got enough value already. And so that range shouldn't scare them away. It should give them a sense of what's possible, but not what's required.
Yeah, we even do a bit of legwork for the customer. That's really well said, Mark. We do a little bit of, customer comes to us, says, we're going to do, A, B, C, D, and E. And we go, great. And we spec it all out and we go, here's 60 grand. I'm always going to go, and if they have a little extra money, they just got a tax return, we can integrate it with QuickBooks and push it to the website. I want to know what the upscale is on that. I also want to know what a core features list is. So even though their users have said, hey, we need all this 60 grand, I'm going to go, let's take a look at what a 40 grand, if we take off some of the reporting or a few dashboards or something like that, is that something that we can easily add next quarter for them, as opposed to having if the boss all of a sudden goes, oh my God, we just got hit with a tax bill and we don't have as much money. I go, great, we've got a suitcase-sized version of what you talked about that will get you that MVP, that minimum viable product. But we also have the contents that are going to project this system forward by phase 2, phase 3, and so forth. So I think it's nice to kind of think for your customer, because like what Mark just said, we can spend all your money and make this thing worthwhile, but money is a reality. So is time. So we want to make sure that if a customer walks into the meeting and is going, this is wonderful, we want it all, we're ready. But if they also go, we don't have quite as much money as we thought we were going to have, or this is a little more aggressive than we thought it was going to be, I want to make sure I've got a package for them that's going to get them usable.
Or even you're new and we think we like you, but you've never delivered anything for us
That's
yet.
right. That's right. And again, with that legacy customer, Steve, you've got more baked in capital with them. With that new customer, it's, who are you? We're still dating and I don't want to marry you yet. Let's just date for a while. So there's a little bit of that comes along With respect, we've got just a handful of more minutes, so I'm going to ask that we kind of keep our answers a little tighter if we can. But when we're estimating, one of my panel members here said, how do you handle the extraneous parts of the development? How do you price those? Ongoing client meetings, project management, testing, bug fixes, data migration, security, training. How do you guys handle those? Steve, you're hot in the middle of my screen right now. How do you guys how do you handle the costing of that? Is it all wrapped in, or do you break it out? Or
I'm sorry, the costing of what?
Project management, meetings, testing, bug fixes, data migration. You wrap all that in?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on the size of the client. For a small client where I don't think they're gonna have a whole lot of overhead of that kind of stuff, you know, if there's a need, you're gonna get on the phone and it's gonna be 30 minutes, you're gonna be done. I may just, you know, make it invisible as customer service and sort of, you know, make sure I've got enough padding to cover myself. But on a larger,
it's rust proofing on a car, right? Yeah, yeah.
What's that?
It's rust proofing on the car. Yeah, we did that rust proofing thing.
With a larger customer where like you're gonna have weekly meetings and stand-ups and you know all that kind of stuff, which some people like. I personally it's a ring of hell for me. So if they're gonna insist on those, they're gonna get billed for those. You know, migration, if we're doing offline development and we're moving from, you know, hey, installing the new system, there's migration there, there's support there. All of those things get added in as layers. I'm sorry?
I just
Somebody had their
to
mic
Tim.
open.
You should be good now, Steve.
Yeah. Yeah, all those things get added in as, you know, here's the development and here's the other stuff. There's, you know, there's support, there's ongoing, blah, blah, blah. That sort of stuff. Hey, I'm sorry, I missed the first 2 minutes. Did we talk about billing for all the stuff we've already talked about?
No.
Should we?
Well, that you've just entered go ahead.
I've entered the hot zone. So what I always tell customers is, you know, people are like, you know, how much is it going to cost? And I say, well, you know, I can estimate the next phase. So there's the initial meeting, you know, the sales process. There's the DNA, design and analysis. Then there's the making the thing. And from here in the sales process, I can say, you know what, this is going to take about this much discovery, design, and analysis, but how much it's going to take to build the thing, I don't know yet because we haven't done the design and analysis. I always charge more for the discovery, design, and analysis, designing the system, more hourly for that than I do for actually building the thing, because as far as I'm concerned, that's where the real work is done. Yeah.
Hardest part of what we do, right?
Yeah.
I always tell everybody the architect gets more for designing the building than the carpenter does for hammering the nails, right? Those guys are $20 an hour. The guy who is putting together the game plan it's worth a lot more. So that's all viable.
So you'll charge a different rate? Sorry, you'll charge a different hourly rate for that?
Yeah.
We don't generally do that, but we will on occasion, and if it's a significant one. But so Dina, what do you? And by the way, to your point, Steve, I'll just kind of give you guys a secret. You know, we always tell everybody when we're architects, we're hourly. When we're carpenters, we can do, you know, a fixed bid or like what Mark was saying, from X to Y with some depending on the size and how clear we are on the scope. We tend to shy away from giving fixed bids on data migration. If it's from a legacy FileMaker system and we're adding on and so forth, that can be done. If you're working from 5 different disparate systems and trying to pull data together and parse and blend and things of that nature, man, every time we've ever estimated that, we've blown some toes off and found out. So we generally go, look, we'll do that hourly. And that's okay too. Here's the project scope. And if we're going to do meetings, et cetera, we'll bill for those separately. I think it's fine to break those out if you want to one at certain times if you're not aware. So Bob, where are your thoughts on this?
Well, part of our retooling that I was talking about earlier was we realized that sometimes that stuff gets overlooked and sometimes it's kind of hard to estimate. And so what we started doing, and I'll have to get back to you on how well this ends up working out, but what we've started doing is we've assigned a percentage to each one of those things. We have a separate section in our FileMaker system that we're you know, so for any project, client meetings is going to take up like an extra 10%. And I'm just throwing out fake numbers because I don't have any of this memorized, and project administration, I'm going to add on 2% and et cetera. And so the bigger the project gets, the more those hours are going to increase. And so in theory, that should work out. So the thing is, what we got to do is we got to do 3 or 4 projects minimum using the system. And I think we've done 2 so far, but where we can start to say, okay, how good or bad are those percentages and how much do we need to adjust them? So hopefully it'll get better over time. But what you said about data migration, that's the one thing that I always tell my clients, all bets are off. There's no way I can give you an estimate. It looks like maybe it's going to be a big data migration, or this one looks like it's going to be pretty small because you only want some supporting data brought over and not all of your history. But beyond that, I will not give them numbers. I just say, okay, it's going to be what it's going to be, and we'll figure it out when we get there.
Yeah. Mark, in terms of those extraneous things, where do you try to give them estimates or ranges, or we're going to just bill you hourly when we get to those things, or where's your thoughts?
For years, we used to have a sort of a model where we would look at all the features, all the things we were going to build, and then we would come up with a pace and a number of meetings and an hours per meeting. But over time, it settled into a percentage system. So all of that stuff we call supplemental. We start by default at 40%. So we mark, for 60 hours of development, we're going to need 40 hours of supplemental, which is going to be everything within the project that involves design, status, deployment, testing. But of course, data migration would be a feature, right? So that might be even a separate if we need it to be hourly and scalable. And then we ask ourselves questions like, is this thing going to have a lot of web and mobile interfaces, which means we're going to have a lot more design and testing work? So now we're going to 50-50. Or is this thing going to be mostly integrations and it's not going to be any front end? So now maybe it's more like, 70-30. But 60-40 is sort of our window. And then we use that to kind of fund that flush budget for all those other activities.
Yeah. The one thing that I'll tell you, we've worked on systems that are, 20 hours, and we've worked on systems that are, 20,000 hours. The one thing that I will say, that whole coefficient, that 20, 40, 60%, from my experience, the larger the project, the more the departmental people, the more sprints you're doing with teams of developers and so forth, that coefficient, we do a 30% across or 40% across. What will work on a small project is generally nowhere near adequate on a much larger system. The amount of PM and supplemental stuff like that tends to ratchet up on those bigger projects.
Number of people in the room can be a big factor.
The communication. I got to talk with the IT. I got to talk with the department heads. I've got to summarize all these documents, get it ready for management. There's just a lot more traffic going on. Any points for you, Dina, on this particular piece?
Just that. So I charge the same hourly rate for a client for anything I do, and hopefully everything I do. Obviously, if I'm going way over expectations and I make a mistake by my not setting expectations right, then I might have to have a negotiation with the client and reset expectations and some hours maybe. That's good to hear that you guys don't put a number on data migration. I tend to go with my this is an idea of what it's going to cost, but it's not firm. But my clients generally, when they're asking for numbers, they want to know for each part a ballpark, right? So once they're asking for ballparks, I try to go with that. And again, I won't do that though in the beginning part of a project though. That usually is once I've gotten to know their system, the new system and the old system better. With existing clients, I still do have the habit of trying to stay away from ballparks anyway. So once they know me and trust me and know the work, and things are done usually in smaller bits after a while, more, I guess I don't know if I can allowed to say agile, but spiral, let's say, then they kind of know what they're in for. And usually things just roll from there.
Nice. Hey, Vince Manano, he's got his hand up. What's up, Vince?
Hey, I just wanted to riff off of what Dina just said, the last comment, which is something I learned from many of you will remember his name, Jeff Coffey. and Jeff had a small company. It was him and Jesse
Fried
and
rice.
I think it's Six Fried Rice, yeah. And they ended up doing some work for from some university kind of group that was doing a lot of different nonprofit kind of work. Anyway, it built up a relationship with this client to the point where like they just started small. They started doing some small things, and basically Jeff and Jesse and a few other people, they were so talented that like you don't want to lose them as developers that you can reach out to and have them do the work for you. So the relationship is the opposite. Like rather than us looking for clients, they didn't want to lose them. So basically when it came to bidding on something, it wasn't a question of like how much, it was just a question of like, when can you do this? So they built up the relationship of trust that they're not going to screw them over and charge them, God knows what for whatever they do. That trust was there. So the topic moves right away to like, hey, we want to do this. Is this feasible? When can you do it? Rather than like, hey, we have this project. How much is it going to cost us? You're having a different conversation with them at that point. And to me, I've always used that as like the basis for cementing the relationship early on to say, yeah, let us do this, see what you think. If you like it, let's continue the relationship of working with you. And then your conversations from that point on are really very different. So.
Yeah, that's a really great approach, and it's a great place to be with a customer if you're in that space. One of the other things, I'm going to leave this little tip, and then we're going to probably move on to our next thing. But one of the tips that we use every once in a while, we get a customer who goes, this absolutely can't be more than $60,000. We run out this scope, and we're kind of rubbing up against that. Customer does, or the customer doesn't want to go through as deep of a discovery process as we want. Then, again, you can either tell me how much you want, or you can tell me how much you want to pay, and I'm gonna win the argument on one of those, right? So one of the things that we'll often do is a customer says, well, we want this thing, and I don't want to spend more than $20,000 on it. You go, okay, well, we're going to build a system that's going to do this, not to exceed X number of hours, not to exceed 4 screens, not to exceed 2 reports. So a lot of the time, the customer is just going, it's an order tracking system, and it's going to cost 40 grand, and we can get started. And if they think that we're going to just continue to respond to mods or change requests or so forth, we put that in there as a back cover just to go, and they know nobody ever like screams about it, but we just go, yeah, we're going to build you this system. It's going to have a list view and a form view and a report. It's going to be X number of dollars. If we don't have comfort in building that, we don't have deep spec that is going to lock the customer into that, then we're going to put something in there that says not to exceed 25 hours or $5,000 or this many screens or this many fields. We're gonna define how much square footage. We're gonna build you that house, but we're gonna tell you what the square footage is and the number of bathrooms we can do, regardless of the fact that you're saying I want the price to be this. So we need to have that cost control in there in those situations. This has been fantastic. Thank you very much. I want to say thanks, number one, to all the people who have been participating on this, and most especially to my panelists who've come up with some really great suggestions and other things associated with this. I am now going to see how this all works, and I am going to go into the lovely and talented Mr. Chris Moyer's Tech News Roundup. So hopefully this comes across real well, and this is going to be probably about a 15-minute little clip here. Hope you guys all enjoy it.
Hello and welcome to the May edition of the Tech News Roundup. We're going to start off with net neutrality, which is back. Back in 2015, the rules were first introduced during the Obama administration. They were repealed 2 years later under President Trump. And now under Biden, the FCC voted 3-2 on April 25th to reclassify broadband as a public utility, just like water and electricity. And that allows the FCC to regulate access to the internet. The feeling was that the COVID-19 pandemic exposed the magnitude of the digital divide.
Dave, I
Okay,
think we
no.
lost the feed when you muted
Yeah.
yourself.
No sound yet.
Yeah, no audio.
Dave, are you using the high def option?
I think you have to be unmuted for us to hear it.
Blah, blah, blah. Sorry, once again.
Roundup, we're going to start
There we
off with net neutrality, which is back. Back in 2015, the rules were first introduced during the Obama administration. They were repealed 2 years later under President Trump. And now under Biden, the FCC voted 3-2 on April 25th to reclassify broadband as a public utility, just like water and electricity. And that allows the FCC to regulate access to the internet. The feeling was that the COVID-19 pandemic exposed the magnitude of the digital divide. Consumers had to rely on high-speed internet for school and work and social and health support. They are expected to get legal challenges from the telecoms industry, and so lawsuits will be coming. And the net neutrality regulations are set to go into effect 60 days after their publication in the Federal Register. So more to come on this one. Next up, May 7th, Apple is doing their launch event. That will be in the past for you, but that's in the future for me doing this recording. You can see from their launch event logo that the Apple Pencil is featured prominently. The Apple Pencil 3, third generation, is expected to be announced there. It may or may not be integrating with the Find My application, allowing you to locate the darn thing when you've lost it. They will also be refreshing the iPad Air models, and the iPad Pro will be getting a new OLED screen. Mark Gurman has a Power On newsletter that's published in Bloomberg. I have the link on the bottom of the slide here. He also mentions in his sort of recap of what's expected here is that Apple also plans to show a new LLM technology. Let me advance the slide here, and we have some verbiage that I've highlighted. This new sort of downscaled LLM is expected to be able to run on device without having to go out to the cloud. So full details should be coming at the Worldwide Developers Conference in June. It'll be unveiling this sort of complete AI strategy then.
Okay.
And we'll know more then, but this is coming. LLMs are getting everywhere, just like sand. Also, he reports that Apple stores are saying that demand for the Vision Pro demos are way down. People call the store, say, I'd like to see the Vision Pro and come in for a demo. Those demo requests have fallen off a cliff. And so that brings us to our next segment, which is Apple slashing the Vision Pro production. As you can see from the text here, after a bunch of devices were sold in pre-orders, they've scaled way down. So the Vision Pro shipments have been cut to 400 to 450,000 units, which is half of what they had originally planned. The analyst who sort of wrote this up says that he's expecting Apple to be adjusting the headset roadmap. It was expected that the company, being Apple, would release a cheaper, lighter model in the second half of the year, addressing two of the biggest complaints about the Vision Pro. But he said there may be no new headset at all from Apple next year. And the sort of takeaway is that the Vision Pro remains a niche product. The big price, the lack of a killer app is making it a hard sell. So sad news for the Vision Pro. Sort of in line with the earlier bit about the Apple coming up with a downsized LLM to run on device, there is another LLM, a mini LLM that called the Phi 3, I'm sorry. Comes in various sizes, 3B to 14B in size, performs exceptionally well in modern benchmarks. They claim to outperform the original ChatGPT model, which is amazing that you could get something on your Android or your iPhone that will outperform ChatGPT with all its weighty cloud infrastructure. Weights have been released. There's a variant available with 128K context length. And so the upshot is on-device LLMs are already here, and you'll be likely seeing a lot of activity in this area over the rest of the year, certainly into next year, I would expect. I have a link at the bottom of the slide if anyone's interested in reading up on this. It's just sort of interesting stuff. Next, we move on to, as I say at the top of the slide, this just in from Alert Tech News Roundup correspondent Bob Shockey. He sent me an email on this one. Frontier Communications got hit by a cyber attack. Incident was detected on April 14th. This telecom serves 25 states, has roughly 3.5 million customers, fiber optic network serving 5.2 million locations. As of the date of this filing that they filed with the SEC, they believe they have contained the incident and have restored core information technology environment in the process of restoring normal business operations. So it seemed to have caused them problems, but they're sort of hedging their bets. They're saying everything's fine, but we may or may not take some financial hits on this. I'm guessing that the mitigation might have cost them some money. And also Heidi Porter, Alert Tech News Roundup correspondent, sent in that there was an issue exposed with Android TVs. This is from 404 Media. There's a link at the bottom of the screen if anyone has Android-powered TVs. Some Android-powered TVs can expose the contents of users' email inboxes if an attacker has physical access to the TV. So basically, if someone lives in Best Buy and had access to devices and opened them up before it got sent to you, they could sideload this. And then Google initially told the office of Senator Ron Wyden that the issue, which is a quirk of how software is installed on these TVs, was expected behavior. But after they were contacted by 404 Media, Google now says it is addressing the issue. So perhaps an issue of your device. Maybe there will be an update coming that will remedy this. Okay, TikTok ban again. And as you can sort of see, not facetiously, but lightheartedly, yes, the House has been voting on TikTok bans. Harder to say than you think. So the earlier ban had a tighter timeline. This new ban has a longer timeline, roughly 9 months, and the White House would have the discretion to extend it for a period of 90 days if they wanted to. All sorts of posturing. This seems a little bit like kabuki theater, so we'll see what happens. In theory, this would start if the Senate votes to approve it, this would start a 270-day clock for TikTok to find a buyer. And if it can't separate from its Chinese parent company, then users could be cut off. So a lot of uncertainty around all of this. As expected, TikTok is planning to sue. So there's a lot of lawsuits in our future, apparently from telecoms, from TikTok, and so on and so forth. So it should be interesting times there. TikTok influencers so keenly interested in this. Next up, we want to get back to the annual Hive Systems password cracking release. This one that I have up on screen is from 2022, and there's a reason I put the 2022 version up there. And that is that up to this year, Hive System is mostly focused on MD5 encryption, and it was getting easier and easier and easier to crack those suckers, as you can see from this. This year, they have switched over to bcrypt, which is a more difficult hash function to crack. And for those of you not terribly familiar with hash functions, here's a little sort of visual example of the difference between an MD5 hash and a bcrypt hash for the same word. As you can see, the bcrypt one is a lot longer. MD5, which stands for Message Digest 5, is widely used hash function, produces a 128-bit hash value, commonly used to verify data integrity. Bcrypt is a password-specific hashing algorithm, incorporates a salt One of the significant advantages of bcrypt is that it's adaptive over time. So as computers get faster and the cracking hardware gets better, you can actually you can throttle the work factor of the bcrypt function to make it slower. So that even as the cracking hardware gets better, that it becomes more resistant to brute force search attacks. And so these numbers are actually going down as the technology switches to bcrypt. So I just thought it was interesting to actually see the hashing technology changing to meet the challenge. I have the link to Hive Systems down at the bottom here, if anyone's interested in it. And if anyone really is geeking out, they can read up more on MD5 versus bcrypt. There's a link there as well. Tesla, profits way down. The company says that EV sales are under pressure from hybrids, but I think they're widely seen as to have a brand problem at this point. Reported revenue of 21.3 billion in the first quarter, a 9% drop from the first quarter of 2023. The company said in its Q1 earnings reports that it experienced numerous challenges, quote unquote, in the first quarter, including the Red Sea conflict and the arson attack at a gigafactory in Berlin. The gradual ramp of the updated Model 3 at its factory in Fremont. I don't know what to say without sounding snarky, so I'll just leave it there that Tesla, the profits are dropping and they're having problems and they're getting them cheating. Walmart, this is a little bit of a stretch to say this belongs in the tech news roundup, but I just think it's tech adjacent. So lots of stores have self-checkout, but lots of stores have found that self-checkout has been leading to lots of shrink, aka people sort of not scanning all their items at checkout, and so it's leading to theft. So as you can see from the bottom paragraph here, significantly higher rate of theft. One study by a shopping startup called Grab and Go suggesting that shoppers are 21 times more likely to sneak a stolen item past a machine than from a human checkout. So it's not just Walmart, so Target, Dollar General, Five Below, lots of retail outfits are scaling back their self-checkout. So that's interesting. Here's a good one here. This article is from the University of Michigan. Timber and timber processing. Residuals include bark, sawdust, slabs, things like that. The state of Maine produces about 1 million pounds of this every year. And so the University of Maine was trying to come up with something to do with all this timber processing waste. And so what did they do? They decided to 3D print a house out of timber processing waste. So here's what the darn thing looks like. It's pretty cool. It's rounded oblong facade. It's a 600 square foot dwelling. It sits next to the University of Maine's Advanced Structures and Composites Center, where last fall it was squeezed out of a massive printer nozzle, like icing from a pastry bag. It has been nicknamed BioHome 3D. It's the first prototype to emerge from the center's 2.5-year effort to create a technology for building homes faster, more efficiently, and less expensively than conventional construction. Maine faces a severe housing crisis, including a shortage of 20,000 homes for low-income folks. So they're expecting big things from this. So here's what it looks inside. It's very cool, kind of Jetsons-y looking, with curved surfaces and so forth. So kind of neat story. I like it. Let's see. Oh, speaking of tech, for those of you who don't know, Herculaneum got buried in lava, just like Pompeii did, and some of the scrolls that were in the libraries there got carbonized, and when people tried to unwrap them, they basically crumbled to dust. There have been projects going on for a while now. This is actually a different project from the main one that you might have heard about from the library of Pompeii. But basically, they have developed technology to read the writing that's on the carbonized scrolls. and using modern imaging techniques such as infrared, ultraviolet, optical imaging, molecular and elemental imaging, thermal imaging, tomography. They've been throwing the book at these things, literally. 1,000 words have been identified, around 30% of the text, I think, shown here, actually, which includes, interestingly, new details about Plato, the development of his Platonic Academy, and the information that identifies his place of burial, which, as it turns out, is right about there. So if you're interested in reading more, check it out. Kind of interesting thing about how technology is uncovering the past. All right, Wacom. So I mentioned earlier that Apple's iPad Pro is supposed to have a new OLED screen. For those of you not familiar, it's organic light emitting diode, organic electroluminescent diode. So Wacom has actually introduced a new product called Moving 13. It's available on the website. And it's available for $750. Full HD 13.3 Samsung OLED display gives it several advantages over comparable mid-range LED-based tablets. The most notable being that this doesn't need a backlight anymore. So it prevents light leakage, excess heat, and also allows the tablet to be more compact. So this is the thinnest and lightest pen display tablet it has ever made, weighing only 420 grams. So cool new product, with taking aim at Apple a little bit. And then this is my last slide. Again, on the new product. This is a product from Pangea, and I think it's just in pre-release right now, so you can join the wait list. But if you do any sort of content creation or video creation where you're using your voice, this will allow you to toggle your voice into any language you want while preserving your natural voice and lip movements. So if you are on camera actually speaking, this will adjust, basically, well, toggle the language and adjust the sound to make it look like you're actually speaking at that point in time. So check that out. That's kind of interesting. And that is all I've got for Tech News Roundup. Thanks for listening.
Wow, that was a lot of stuff in that one. You know, one of the things that Chris, he delivers so much content. I always have to go back to YouTube and look at the meeting or later and go, I got to look into that and I got to grab that URL and so forth. A lot of material there. So super, super helpful. And I really appreciate his efforts on that. Surprising and maybe not to some, but the Vision Pro seems like it's slowly receding into the sea a bit if Apple doesn't get that turned around or get some more market desire of that product. Okay, we are going to be taking a short break, probably about 15 minutes or so. We'll come back. We'll go into the breakout rooms. Pick one if you want, and I'll throw everybody to the wind. And we'll be coming back with short announcements and such, and then can't wait to see Mr. Mark Richman coming in and giving his reprisal of his Claris Engage session on visualization stuff. Hey, thanks, guys. All right. Picking back up where we left off. So we're kind of in the little break section. Anybody, just first and foremost, announcements, anybody hiring, new technology stuff, did you guys know, et cetera, et cetera? Any sort of insights, anything anybody wants to share with the community? Well, I'll start. Very interesting thing. I'm on a number of lists with some various FileMaker developers. There sounds like, I don't know if you guys have heard this, and it's something I think it's been kind of quietly disguised, but it sounds like there is a vulnerability on FileMaker server that's been there for quite some time. And I believe that Claris has kind of quietly patched it on the latest and greatest versions of 19 and 2023. But I might be able to find a little more information about this, but it has something, I don't even recall the specifics. It has some sort of vulnerability of using port 5003, I believe. I don't know if anybody here has any more details on it, but I'll try to find some details and maybe share it with the group. In short, make sure all your customers are on the latest version of 19 or 20, because this one sounds like people can get to, even if the file is encrypted, people can get into things that they shouldn't be able to. So
You
I don't
need
know.
19.6.4 on the 19 version, and I don't have it memorized, but I think maybe somebody else on my team here might have that memorized. Guys?
20 by 20, 2023 V3 or something like that.
I
Dave,
can-
is this, do you know, is it just on files that are exposed to the internet or on a LAN, or how exposed are we?
Well, I would imagine if you're not exposed to the internet, some of the, is there still vulnerability? I believe it's access to data inside the database that people shouldn't have. So could be, a bad actor in-house, even if it's not exposed. Could be, certainly anything open to the internet.
Now, Bob, you just mentioned 19.6.4, and I'm on .3. When I check for updates, I don't see an update available.
Maybe it was .3, sorry.
Okay.
No,
thank you.
that seems to resonate with me.
19.6.4 is correct.
Okay.
Okay.
And it is not that easy to get. You can get it from the licensing page. Somebody's going to have an email from orders@claris.com. And if you open up the page where your certificate is, you'll find that the download will be that. Just to fill in a couple things here, 20.3.2 is the version pertaining to version 20. Believe that's accurate, comes from the source of the individual who located this bug. The exploit is unclear, thankfully. Also, FileMaker Cloud 2.20.1.4, although I'd imagine that that's, handled by Claris directly. Final question came up is, what do I patch? Do I have to patch the client and the server software? And the answer from the source, from the individual who found the bug, that's an appeal to authority argument, is server only. As long as the clients are compatible, you do not have to patch the client server patch. That's all I know.
Yeah. Lynn, I want to check in with you. Lynn's in charge of our June meeting. How are you doing?
No, I'm July. You
You're
and
July?
JR
Oh,
traded.
JR, that's
remember?
right. Jonathan's out today. Matter of fact, he was supposed to be doing this meeting and we swapped. So I think he's got a relatively good agenda. I was just saying during the break, great having a panel, great talking about discovery and sharing this with the group. And might be nice to have some more of these panels in the future with a variety of people. And that one of the things I want you folks to know at our last board meeting, again, we get wonderful people showing up here with a sort of, please entertain me, put a show on for me. This is a lot of effort and work on our part. So number one, raise your hand if you got some crazy little tip or trick or some little case study, something you saw at another conference that you want to share or bring those people to our attention. And more importantly, do what you did today. Great participation. So we love when people are raising their hands, and we do our best to kind of rope them into the conversation. But raise your hand, be an active participant in this group, because it's not our job to create everything for you. It's for us to work collaboratively together and have some great content. I've got just a few minutes. I was, it was funny, in our last board meeting, I was going through some old files and I was trying to show the board members something, and I stumbled across something. And this is just a 2 or 3 minute filler, but I thought it was sort of fun. And it was from a developer conference session I gave years ago. On interface. I was talking about interface designs and things of that nature. And I just wanted to share with you because it's kind of fun. It's sort of before and afters, luminaries in our industry, many of who are in the room today, and what they used to do with their interfaces and what they do now, or at least then, years later. So I call this, you guys are seeing the screen okay, yeah?
Yep.
Got it. So I call this interfacius absentius. This is the lack of any interface whatsoever, just throwing fields onto a screen. So this is sort of a before back in the day. And this is that same person years later after they put a little attention into this. This was, again, our very own Jonathan Reff. And Houston, we have an interface. I've started using interfaces now. So I thought that was kind of fun. Another person in our audience today, I call this one Shades of 1994, with field and button shading, embossment, engraving from every possible angle. This is, I love all the shadows and drop shadows and recessed. Everything has got depth to it. And that same person years later started creating products like this, much better. And again, this is our own Vince Manano. He moved away from Phoenix. He's no longer developing in the bright sunlight. Next in line, boxitis. A box for everything and everything in a box. So having those interfaces where we just throw noisy little boxes everywhere to kind of help theoretically organize things. And instead you get this sort of manufactured chaos. So this same person years later learned a lesson and got a bit more subtle. And this is old expert in the community that many of us remember, Elise Kazar. She saw the movie $1 Million Baby. She now understands boxing's place in society. So I just thought that was sort of fun. We have this one called quilting. Again, another person in our midst here. It's a patchwork of using scraps and colors from everything. So anything you find, let's just glue it into the interface. And that's what we have here. We've got bold, we've got red, we've got blue, we've got embossed. We've got everything under the sun, all the color palettes being used extensively. The same person years later, a much nicer interface, and he does quality stuff these days. And again, our own Howard Schlossberg, he had an interface garage sale. He got rid of all the scraps and stuff and started building these nice UIs that we see now. Interactus petroglyphus. This is using ancient Aztec symbols to signify database action. So this one's sort of fun. You've got the sun god over here and a pineapple and some sort of dancing tribesman. I don't know exactly how this all fits in, but kind of odd. Later, this person started building, slightly better interfaces. And of course, one of the godfathers of our interface community, Albert Howard Alvarez. He reduced his tropical fruit intake and ritual sacrifices. He's been cured. So that's sort of fun. And then, not to be outdone, the Skittles psychedelia. This is like, oh my God, somebody did an acid trip and threw colors and bubbles everywhere on an interface. So, wow, look at all this. This is so fancy. And then years later, a much nicer representation. And of course, yours truly, I sold my lava lamp and now I'm cured. So anyway, I just thought this would be sort of a fun little thing to kill a few minutes of time and to show how far some of us have come in our years of development. It's very fun, especially to have, Vince and Howard in the audience with us here today.
I missed the bubbles, Dave.
Yeah, the bubbles are good, aren't they?
Dave, deep dive. What was the inspiration for the bubbles?
Dude, I was working in recording studios. I probably had a contact high from many of the artists around me. I can't speak to what was going through my head. I don't know.
It's fascinating how every iteration resembles the OS of the time.
A little bit, right? You get into that. Hey, what am I seeing around myself that lends me to want to use those elements in my stuff. So yeah, absolutely can come into, we're influenced by our surroundings, right? As we say. I think I've just made you co-host. It gives me great pleasure. I just have to tell you, number one, Mark is a friend. He is just a good egg. He always gives a lot of thought into what he does. If you ever get a chance to see him speak at Claris Engage or any kind of thing, he always just brings really cool thoughts and wisdom. My neck always gets tired when I'm watching Mark because I'm always nodding like, yes, that's exactly right. So I went to the session at Engage this year. I really enjoyed it, and I can't wait for you guys to get a look at it too. Welcome, guys, to the wonderful Mark Richman.
Okay, well, thank you. It's quite a lead-in. Let me share my screen and hope I do this correctly. Are you guys seeing
We got it.
One big slide.
Yep.
Excellent. And if I start it going into slideshow mode, are you seeing that?
Yep.
Excellent. Awesome. So I'd be remiss if I didn't say, first of all, I'm equally appreciative of David showing up at so many of my sessions over the years. I doubt there's very much I'm sharing here that is unfamiliar to him, but it's nice to have some allies in the audience who can also add additional oomph to whatever it is I'm trying to talk about, whether it's relationships or running a business or selling licensing or things like this, which really kind of speak to my soul. And someone who doesn't develop anymore, I like this topic because I use it all the time in my own personal life and in my life with my kids and around my house and with my family. I'm even with my mom, just trying to help illustrate concepts and ideas. I think having a toolbox of tools and ideas and comfort with sketching and drawing and doodling and stuff, even if you're not artistic, can be a really powerful tool. And in our work, I think it's extremely powerful. So I work to try to get my more technical developers to get comfortable with this skill as well. You can find this presentation in its original form in the community site. So I just want to mention that. I've only made one edit, which is the green words in the top title here, because it's obviously a play on, a picture is worth 1,000 words. I'm going to be talking about what might come across as static pictures, but my real message here is it's not just one drawing. It's a series of drawings over time. It's storyboarding. It's story mapping. It's sketches that evolve. It's not letting something become one precious, perfect image as much as quick and dirty to get the ideas across. So I'm going to not try to do exactly what I did before and just try to sprint through these slides because, as I saw in the previous discussion, audience participation is obviously much different in these environments than during an exchange session. So let's go on. So this is my vision for what the presentation was supposed to be like in pictures. Everyone's got questions. I am brilliant and stand up in front of everyone and show them using drawings. They have conversations and then they applaud because it was so great. I think the main reason I came up with this topic is to do with the fact that we're always communicating. I've had a lot of different roles in my life. I started out as a scenic and stage and lighting designer and an architecture student, and then got into software, then got into technical stuff. I got into networking and security. But I have used drawings and sketches and images and various tools and methods, and I'll show a bunch of examples at the end throughout my entire career. And I imagine I continue to, will. Even in the work I'm doing now, trying to run the business and eventually maybe even providing consulting or coaching to other businesses, which is kind of my retirement plan. I imagine that'll continue to be a key thing. Like a whiteboard in a room is for me an enormously powerful and empowering kind of activity. I also have a lot of family and I have a lot of different communities. There's people on my team, there's my kids and nieces and nephews, there's my friends, my mom, my friends from school. I find that all of these different communities, I find myself pulling out a piece of paper. I find myself grabbing the notepad or a sketch pad or freeform or something that's close at hand on a device so that I can get a point across if I can't do it only with words. And we know, I think, that people learn in a lot of different ways. So it's also a very powerful way to connect with people who maybe just aren't grokking what you're trying to say to them. Can't really visualize it in their head, so you need to actually visualize it for them right there in black and white. The takeaways I'm hoping everyone will get, and I'm not looking at anybody's faces because of the way the screens are set up, so I'm going to trust you'll either blurt out and interrupt, or that, David, you'll watch for questions and interrupt me appropriately. I want to make sure everyone comes away hopefully thinking that, yes, I should add some visual stuff into what I do. I shouldn't just be writing things down and just talking and using words. I should find other ways to cement, communicate, or confirm my understanding. I would like people to, once they've accepted that and believe that, to come up with some ideas about where those could be the most useful, right? You could lean on them too hard and they use them for everything. And then it's like, okay, I get it, just talk. But there's places where they are really useful for like getting over a hump or getting past a roadblock or breaking through a sort of a misunderstanding or a complex idea. I think one of the ideas that came up earlier that I really like, and I keep hitting the drum with this on my team, is the power of a simple network diagram for every single client. And yeah, like 80% of them will just be the same, 3 objects, a server, a client, a cloud. Because it's hosted in the cloud and you can access it from anywhere on your laptop or your device. But the ones that don't have that, the ones that have integrations, the ones that have firewalls, the ones that have multiple locations, the ones that have synchronizations, the ones that have anything other than the vanilla norm, it's really hard to communicate so that everybody really is on the same page about where everything is. And so that's one of my standard predictions. Like if we don't have that, I guarantee some misunderstanding will happen at some point along the line between us, between IT, between the end users, between your future developers who are supporting the solution who aren't here today actually giving birth to it. And so that's an example of all the different places you might find one, and a common one for me. And really just hopefully to provide some inspiration and demystification of like, where are the tools you could start? I think there'll be a lot of audience participation there. Like, what is your favorite tool? Why do you use it? And so on. I'm going to use the words picture, image, illustration, drawing. I'm going to use every single version. So I just want to make sure that none of those are intended to be specific or intimate a particular type of technology. I use these terms interchangeably. They're all the same thing as far as I'm concerned for today's presentation in particular. So I won't go down this rabbit hole, although I did when I was presenting and preparing. There's a lot of information online. It's really kind of fascinating. If you don't already know somebody who's visually impaired or has difficulty, or if you're like me, you've got glasses late in life and you're discovering more and more you can't even look at your own phone without them. There's a lot of information out there about the impact of visual communication and the misreadings and opportunities that it presents and obstacles to overcome. We've all seen interesting, curious drawings about, optical illusions, and then we've seen things where it's not even intended to be optical illusion, but it just shows a bias in the way our brain processes visual information. And I tried to categorize these into some of what I think are the most impactful and interesting findings that you'll find out there if you go search. And some of the most interesting books I've read really kind of dig into aspects of this. But whether it's patterns, whether it's retention, whether it's telling a story, whether it's maintaining someone's interest, whether it's distilling complexity into something simple or large amounts of data, there's a lot of power in using visual communication. So it isn't just for communicating, with a client during requirements gathering or with a user about building an interface, that too. But it can be incredibly useful in other domains, like I mentioned earlier, to be able to share information with an audience about performance over time of a company or evolution over time of an audience. And I've got some references at the end to some books that do that on a very large scale about things that have to do with the ecology or the economy or different cultural movements or different cultures of people as they move in and out of different areas or land masses over time or over history. We've all seen a really great map or a drawing that really helped us understand a National Geographic story or some other kind of history lesson. We probably all have a book we remember as a kid that finally connected the dots with us on the sequence of events that took place during the American Revolution or some other kind of period of history that you found interesting. And so I definitely think that if you're on the fence, not so sure that this stuff really matters, think it's just about doodling to get past interface questions or workflow stuff, there's a lot more to it that can really enhance your ability to help clients even just zero in on what the most important features or what the biggest impact would be or what the outcome might be at the end of a particular solution, almost as sort of indirection. Like, I'm going to talk about this visualization to help you understand the lever I'm trying to put into this system. I'm not really going to draw like bunches of paper turning into something simple electronic. I'm going to give you a sense of the volume of orders you can process in time compared now to there. You're not understanding 10x. Let me draw something that is 1x and 10x. And now let's see if that drives the point more. It's also everywhere, right? So whether you know it or not, you're consuming various types of visualization and cues all the time. So again, all more persuasive slides, road signs, billboards, comics, infographics, sticky notes, emojis. Like, we are constantly using them and consuming them without necessarily creating them. And so I think that's another concept I want to get across is you're already accustomed to these things. So is your audience. So let's take advantage of it. So let's talk about how you'd use this in projects, right? Because it's great to talk about this high level. Let's get down to brass tacks. There's a lot of challenges in the work that we do. Overload is probably the biggest one. We talked about that earlier during requirements gathering. There's a lot of complexity to the solutions we build. Even something that a client dismisses being just a simple order taking system, we all know is a whole bunch of other moving parts if it's really going to deliver the impact and the value that makes it worth not the spending the 20 grand that they thought, but the 30 that you think it really needs. Not to mention data migration and all these other things. There's just tons and tons of topics. The more you unpack it, it seems the deeper it goes. There's a lot of ambiguity, like I mentioned. People don't understand just words. They don't understand the domain. That's not their business, right? I say that to clients all the time. We do this all day. You've got this other business that you do every day, and then you're going to peel off an hour to talk to us. There's no way I could possibly jam in everything we're going to do to build what you want into that hour. we are very good at unpacking what you do in that hour to figure out what we should build you, but we also don't live your life every day, and you can't live ours. Misunderstandings and misinterpretation are expensive. I think I mentioned in the chat earlier when we were talking about paid discovery, or when does discovery happen, something that I love that a member of my team, I want to say Greg Lane has said this to me before, is if they don't want to pay for discovery now, they're going to pay for it later, right? They're going to pay for it when you have to refactor things. They're going to pay for it when we make wrong turns and have to backtrack. They're going to pay for it as we do more extended design processes as we go downstream, and the project will take longer to deliver. So you pay for that learning somewhere. Whatever you can do to eliminate assumptions, eliminate ambiguity, the sooner the better. There's a lot of technical jargon, so it's can also be useful to illustrate technically what's going on to help people understand some of the more complex pieces of security and integrations where a lot of that jargon comes up. And this is something that you know, humans have to communicate to humans. It's too hard for tools and technologies, even AI, to do this completely without us, at least right now. Maybe forever. Human beings and the things that we create and invent, including tools like that, we're the inventors and creators. We're always going to keep innovating and creating something new. So if we take this down to kind of more simple, the kind of things hopefully we can all agree on, these are what I think are common stages of many projects, right? You might have slightly different versions of these words. You might have fewer or more steps in your process, but a traditional development or project development lifecycle in software will include, wherever you happen to jump in here, some kind of ideation. We need to solve this problem, some kind of planning process and discovery, some kind of design and prototyping and development, and some kind of testing, and then deployment and data migration. There'll be a variety of stages that kind of loop round and round as you go from, you know, I wonder if we can solve this problem, or how should we solve this problem, to let's solve it this way, to what is it going to take to do that. And that's true in construction, that's true in software development, that's true in planning dinner, really, and or planning a meal or starting a business. So conceptually, I'm using these just to give us a framework for the next series of slides. So ideation is, I think, a really critical one. I'll admit that it's one that I probably don't use as many visuals as I could, because it often is extremely fast, right? There's a lot of, this doesn't exist already, we don't do it this way already, you know, what if, and it goes on and on. There are tools, however, some of them have already been mentioned today by others, that can allow you to start to capture some of those ideas, so they're not so elusive and ephemeral. They can also be very useful if you capture them, to allow you to return to them, to let you simmer on them, to maybe compare them to one another, maybe compare the now to the then, and so on. Tools that tend to fall into that category are multitudinous. I'm not going to capture all of them. Examples here are the kinds of things you might see in a mind mapping software, you might see in a Miro, where you have the ability to kind of branch, create, clone, link, draw connecting lines. I created something on the right there a long time ago that was sort of trying to compare using a swim lane methodology or a step process side-by-side methodology, an old process versus a new process. I never even launched that diagram on the right side. It was for me a way for me to work through in my head. Here's how everything's happening now, and here's how it might happen in the future. And I found that of all the different tools I was trying to do that with, like story maps above and below, that I needed something that was really like more like able to show there's one person here, in this case there'll be two, and in this case there's two, but now it'll be back to one, and there's nobody doing this now, but now there'll be somebody. So ideation can benefit. These are much more technical drawings. You can do this with a napkin and a pencil, right? If you move on to the planning stage, now we're getting a little bit more specific, right? Usually when you're getting into planning, you're at least sketching out broadly, you know, timetables, dependencies, what needs to happen in what order, maybe in order of operations, and sequences. You might want to be able to show this is a small and simple and quick thing. This is something that's going to actually take some time and needs to be broken down. This might require one person, this might require 5. It's high level typically, right? We're not talking about day by day, hour by hour, minute by minute. A lot of times planning for us is a simple matter of resource allocation. What are we going to do and who's going to do it? And what's left to be done that no one's been assigned to do yet? And who's even available to do something because I haven't already assigned other things to them and they've hit some capacity. So our traditional tools for doing that kind of stuff, you know, we use here Jira at Skeleton Key. I think down below, I've got an example of a Fibonacci sequence, which gives us, kind of a visual sense of scale and order of magnitude. You might use a calendaring system, maybe some kind of color or other mechanism to kind of allow you to see that. I could have put dozens of different ways of looking at timelines and assignments and capacity planned versus actual. These all fall into the same space. Again, I had a lot of technical examples at my fingertips. I think that Fibonacci one at the bottom, obviously you could draw that on a wall or a piece of paper. I think for a while I just had the numbers on the wall in front of me, and over time the eyeball was able to look at the numbers, and even just because of the size of the digits, right? The 1, 2 versus the 13, the 21, and the 55, there's something even about the density and complexity of the numbers themselves that without the color, without the bar that associates them, still communicates something about the simple light-weightedness of 1 versus the more heavy-weightedness of something like 55. When we get into discovery, now we've gotten past the should we build it, what should we build, what are we aiming for, that ideation stage. Maybe we've done a little bit of planning and thinking about who might do what in what order. In some ways, I might have switched some of these slides versus my circle diagram. I'm just realizing that now as I'm reprising this. When we get into discovery, I think that's obviously the meat of what we talked about today, right? So I don't need to beat that horse there. You guys know what happens in discovery. We're trying to understand where they are and where they want to go. We're trying to understand what needs to change, where the pain is, and come up with some recommendations or ideas about future possibilities. There's no wrong way to visualize any of these steps. This is a collection of, and in fact, I found this was true on several of the next sections. There's a lot of these drawings and a lot of these drawing styles, a lot of these drawing tools fit nicely into almost any stage, right? So here you've got a topology diagram in the bottom left, you've got a story map in the bottom right, referencing back to Bob's mention of stories on board. You got a couple of manually written, what look like a topology diagram, but were really more because I created them in a room in front of people on a whiteboard. They're actually the end result of what was something created in front of them in real time, sort of like one of those whiteboard drawing animations you see online, where as the story gets told, the thing gets drawn and things get erased and other things get drawn in. So the top right was me trying to help a client understand how they were going to move from a paper-based process and the delays that took to get that information into an Access database and eventually get it up to a SharePoint system, and that we could replace that by allowing them to, that was like the first drawing, kind of a before drawing. But I had to draw it as a way to do several things. I drew it as I talked about it to explain to the client, this is what you're doing now, right? And here's what happens as a result of that. That's what that little calendar and that clock are. And here's what other people are doing over here, right? They're also putting data, and that's also going into the same place, right? And so there was a narrative that was going along with that. That middle drawing, the real messy one right here, there was 25 people in a room, 5 different departments, all of them working on the same problem, all doing it over Excel, not in real time, struggling to communicate and have shared understanding about where things stood and what the status was. There was a vision by the director of this team who was like, I think there's a better way. We just had a single system where everybody could see their facet of the current work in progress, when they need to see it, almost like it's routing and visible to them only when it's something that they need to approve or do something with. And so again, there was a lot of questions, and I was drawing and sketching, wondering if information was going to come from the AS400, talking about the ability to exchange information and planting some seeds about what was possible, but really trying to capture through discussion and drawing in real time in front of them. On the left side, we have the results of those conversations, right? On the left top, it was a conversation with a technical IT group, a managed IT services group that used to be part of the company. And we were all over the place about like all the different ways that requests came in and what the right way was to route them and get them assigned to the right person and hold ourselves accountable to a service level agreement and not lose anything that might fall between the cracks. And it took a lot of whiteboard drawings. It took a lot of discussions and debates to eventually arrive at a rough manual drawing of something like that and eventually codify it into here is the way we work, right? So that wasn't built in a discussion. That was the culmination of a series of discussions before anything was built, before anything was automated, before anything was made. We wanted to know in a vacuum how the process should work. So we all had the same understanding. before we actually started to build something. And then obviously the bottom left was an example of a relatively common, FileMaker environment. But in this case, there was a little bit of syncing and stuff going on, and people were getting that glazed look in their eyes and not understanding. And so I drew something on the board and it was ugly. And I came back and codified it so that IT and the customer and us were all on the same page. Where was the security? What was moving in what direction? Where were different devices actually residing? And that would prompt good questions about things like VPN, IP addresses, and so on and so forth. But you're going to see examples of similar drawings like that. A few new ones will come up. Obviously, we get into other sections like prototypes and interfaces. But you're going to see more of those kinds of drawings show up further downstream because they don't just work during discovery. They have a lot of value later as well. Design is a topic I'm not an expert in any way, shape, or form. I got out of day-to-day development right around the time design, UI, and UX started coming into our day-to-day development. Despite what David just showed us in the evolution of interfaces, I think we've all seen dramatic improvements in UI since then, and a much more mature understanding of user experience in the community as a whole, and maybe the world as a whole in the last 10 to 15 years. In many ways, it boils down to, from a nuts and bolts standpoint, is that now we're starting to get into actually what it might look like, what it might feel like, what it might be like to actually inhabit this software. And that is another kind of hurdle to overcome with users. Like, you may be nodding and understanding the functionality. You may be nodding and understanding, the workflow and the topology even of how the thing is deployed. But there's this assumption that's brewing in the background as you're doing that work with your client and even your development team together, same developers sitting in the same room together, you would presume, like they get it, who have a different vision in their head about what that thing is going to look like. We've all seen that drawing with the tree swing, right? And all the different ways it was defined by the contractor and the carpenter and the homeowner and what the kid really wanted in the first place. And I think we've all done that party game where someone describes something to you and you draw it, and they're like, draw a line horizontally across the page and now go up about an inch and then make a circle, and then you show everybody's drawings and they're radically different than what the person was actually describing on their card, right? So no matter how much understanding there is about what you're trying to draw, it's amazing once people start to actually make it concrete and visible, the thing you're going to make, how dramatically different that can be. And I've seen that in all of those previous lives I had, architecture and theater. I'd be up late talking to a director and have a real great vision for what the set might look like. And they had this, like, they were just so excited. And I was so excited. And we said all the right words. And then I went and did a sketch and I brought it back to them and they were like, oh, that's nothing like I thought you were describing. And so the earlier that we can introduce even pencil sketches, even thumbnail sketches, the better. So these are examples of different levels of complexity that we put together during the course of a single project for a client that had a food bank. They did collections of food. Actually, this was actually almost like a central authority. They were going and they were collecting food from mostly grocery stores, sometimes restaurants in the general region in St. Louis, bringing them back to a central warehouse and then distributing them out to various food banks from there. But one of their goals was to actually have some of those food banks, especially the ones that were regular customers at the warehouse, to just go directly and pick it up and cut out that extra step. It was being done with paper, right? So they would be told where to go by paper and email and printouts, and then they would take these paper forms and they'd go and say, I'm here to pick up that stuff. And they would fill out the form of what they got, poorly or well. They would get a signature or not. They would rip the triplicate form. They'd leave a piece behind. They'd eventually maybe get that piece of paper back to the warehouse where they needed to record all of the stuff that they received, because the restaurant or supermarket wanted to claim it as a donation. They wanted to claim it as impact for grants and other types of tax reasons. And they also wanted to know which agencies were actually doing what they said they do, picking up the food that had been promised and not letting it sit there and end up in the trash. So we needed, over the time, those drawings on the right to start to just create quick sketches with the client in the conference room. I brought a whiteboard, or they had a whiteboard, of what that solution might look like. And they were ugly, quick, dirty sketches, again, written and drawn and talked about so that those arrows made sense and the check boxes make sense and the scribbles made sense to them. And eventually on the left side with Balsamic created some nice cleaner versions of what those actually would look like. And the end solution actually looked dramatically like that one on the left. It was like, here's how simple this could be for these volunteers who are retired, maybe technology agnostic, maybe not so familiar. How easy can we make it for them to not make a mistake filling out this form, so you get the data in real time immediately as soon as they pick it up, and have the ability to route someone else to pick up food if it didn't get picked up by 3 p.m. or something. This isn't a new idea either, this idea of using wireframes or sketches in some way. I shared a picture there in the bottom right from a previous webinar that was put on, I think, by Codance, maybe in their early days, or where they were talking about the same thing, the use of wireframes as a device for kind of getting shared understanding with the client about what an interface might be, and to even use it as a sort of sandbox in which you might add comments and edits and make annotations to make it even clearer. Like, all right, this drawing is clear to everyone, but let's make sure this is bold, and can we move this up or make it bigger? Or what about adding something here that's not in the pretty wireframe, but I want to sketch it in by hand now to make sure it's visible. So not a new idea, a lot of tools out there to do that with. And then we get into development, right? Nuts and bolts. This is the stuff that I think for years, all of us have done before we thought about UI, UX, prototyping and things like that. That's where you get into things like ERDs, whether they're quick and dirty sketches on a whiteboard, whether they're more sophisticated drawings in OmniGraffle, whether they include optionality or not, whether they get into categories and colors and phases and such, like the top right. I think on the top left, I have an example of the use of stories on board to create an object map, which is another type of ERD, where each column represents a type of entity and kind of represents below it what kinds of relationships it has to other entities. It's an entirely different way of thinking about object or entity mapping that I had never seen before, but one of my teammates brought into the mix and allowed them to really quickly see the complexity of connections between objects on the very left side of that drawing versus ones on the right. Whereas might be hard to tease that out of, you know, I can tell on the bottom left that there's a lot going on with events because it's in the center and there's lots of lines coming into it. It'll be really hard to do that on the top right because it's just a grid, and I'd have to go around and start counting like which of these is the most connections. It would be really hard. And then again, there's an example of an annotated, topology diagram or network infrastructure diagram for that same solution I mentioned with the food collections, where, all right, so they saw how it was going to maybe look and feel, but the IT folks needed to understand how was the data going to move between all these different systems, which systems were where in this environment, and what was the trigger and timing and the technology involved, and where was that email going to go when it goes out to give the donor a receipt, because now they're not going to get the piece of paper. And so it allowed us to bring some of the workflow and functionality and pair it with some of the technical diagramming in a way that answered questions for a particular set of audience. And then lastly, you get to deployment, training, migration, launch, documentation, communication to people who weren't part of the project but might need to take care of the solution downstream. And I find in general, these diagrams tend to be some of the most technical. But that's because a lot of these have to do with, getting things launched and running and operating and maintained. But there is a drawing example in here where it was a little bit more like a step-by-step. I did like a storyboard in the bottom right. It was actually a during COVID session with a client where I pulled the big whiteboard up to the window of my office so that I could draw and have them see it while I was talking. So I didn't have to rely on screen drawing, and I could just use something familiar, where I wanted them to kind of see, screen by screen, how a user might inhabit this solution and use it on a web browser without having to, fumble or create something beautiful and pretty, and where I could document some of their questions or make erases. And you can see my favorite part of that bottom drawing is this little Venn diagram that I drew on the fly, because I could see confusion brewing during the conversation about the database they had, the student database. This was for a special school district, and the applications that were coming in to get those students services from the special school district, and the overlap between the fields in the application, some of which were application specific, some of them were related to the student, and the student database where they were used to putting all the stuff in from the paper forms. And so I was like, well, some of those fields are, but others aren't. And I was like, let me just show you. And I just drew a quick 2 circles and filled in. And I said, so here are the fields for the application, and here are the fields for the student database. And there's some of them in the middle that are shared. And it was like, boom, the light bulb went off. Client understood. Top left corner is another example of that. There was, NAS systems and Ignite and firewalls and all different kinds of technologies going on in the client, and the IT person needed a quick sketch, so I grabbed the whiteboard again and did it. In other cases, I did something more polished. And then the top right was a super complex setup. I mean, there was SQL servers, there was sync deck, there was multiple environments, there was backup environments, and we were trying to go, this is one of 3 drawings. It was like, here's where you are now and how complex it is, and here's where we'd like to get you to. And it was a much simpler diagram when it was done. And that was a lot of drawing time to get the drawings technically accurate. But my ability to jump into a room with a bunch of people who were responsible for all those servers, after talking with the champion of the solution who understood that well enough to say, here's where you are and here's what this project is about getting you to. And for them to be able to see the before and after on the infrastructure itself, I should have really showed the after picture. Again, a light bulb moment. I could have spent hours talking with the IT people. No, that's not what I mean. And, are you sure it's not? What about, have you accounted for this? And this way I could show it with a legend, what color meant what, how complex visually they could squint at it and go, that's a spaghetti mess. And then they could open their eyes up and they could see this nice streamlined triangle that we created at the end, which was just 3 points. And it was like they were sold. Now it was just a question of asking a couple follow-up questions, because they could see immediately how we were going from one situation to another. It was kind of like that ability in that top left corner there to see the difference between the embeddedness of the first entity and maybe some entities further downstream to the right, which have many fewer tiles underneath them. They were able to look at that and see mess, and look at the other diagram and see not mess, and they were sold. So there's pitfalls, right? Anything you make precious and invest a lot of time into is inevitably going to change, right? Whether it's your relationships or your kids or your home. I think earlier someone today mentioned the word entropy. It's one of my favorite words. Like, things fall apart. And if you make any of your drawings and diagrams too precious and cling to them as the source of truth. So I don't look at them until the very end as anything other than a snapshot of what we built, knowing that it will likely change moments later, or at least in the next version or release. But along the way, I like to think of those as artifacts, as disposable. They are useful devices for getting us over obstacles. They are useful devices for developing shared understanding. If we hold on to them and they are no longer in sync with the current understanding, they will actually create more confusion than they ever unwound in the first place. Even overly complex or poorly constructed visuals can create problems. So you want to start out simple, simple shapes. That Venn diagram drawing a minute ago was just 2 circles, right? But that was really impactful, and that could live on probably for a long time and be useful, not just for the users, but maybe for the decision maker and others later on, because it is somewhat, not the word ephemeral, but it'll last forever. There can be cultural barriers. So going back to the cognitive studies, a lot of the stuff I stumbled upon was that we make assumptions about the meaning of certain shapes and drawings and colors that aren't necessarily the same with every audience, whether it is because of where they're from or the domain that they're working in. I think we've all seen this, like that great example about the different icons and like, what are these? And they must mean something to the developer, but do they mean something to the users? So it's important to seek simple diagrams, ones that are universally understood, and to confirm your understanding. So you don't create, a road sign or an image that leaves people scratching their heads. I have a road sign like this at home that somehow found its way home with me when I did the backpack thing in Europe a lifetime ago as a teenager. And it's a guy digging, and he's wearing like a hat or a cap that is not a hard hat. It's like a chapeau, and he's digging. It's a men working sign. And I remember looking at it, standing on the street, being like, what the heck is that sign? I have no context for understanding what that is. And then I finally was like staring at it long enough, and I was like, oh, and I kind of looked behind it and I was like, oh, I get it. And then I was a teenager, and so I took it. But I think the key thing for me there is now when I travel, I'm always looking at the signs and trying to understand like what is the way that they describe things here. We were talking earlier about traveling to Canada and Whistler, and I love the fact that everywhere I went, all the exit signs, all the evacuation signs were all green. There wasn't this, like in the US, it's always exit in red letters, right? But these were always green with a person running. It was super clear. Like I knew that's where I go if I need to get the heck out of here. And so looking for ways to create drawings that are universally understandable for your audience is good. And then the last is, just not being consistent. Whatever style you happen to adopt, try to use that style for that project and that audience. If you discover something new, don't switch gears in the middle. You're training the team you're working with who doesn't do this for a living on the visual vocabulary that you're using for their project. The more you can be consistent with that, the better. And that's true for your team. Like, our topology diagrams and network diagrams at Skeleton Key are probably always going to be created in Draw.io or OmniGraffle, or using icon sets that are similar so that they don't have to jump hoops through, was that a firewall? Is that a server? Because I don't want them to have to wonder and scratch their heads. I want there to be some continuity that even if they pull up a diagram from 2012, it instantly is recognizable. What's a server? What's a client? What's a workstation? What's a device? Maybe it's not the perfect iPad icon, but it's a tablet, so that's good enough for me. And I'd rather stick with the bad tablet icon all the way down the line so that everyone understands it's a tablet forever. Even when they pull up an archive of something from years ago, then risk the stumble when they're like, something changed. Does that mean something? All right. Useful tools. I know I'm going fast, but I'm trying to leave lots of time for discussion. I see there's chat, so I'm hoping that David will interrupt me if I need to slow down, shut up, answer a question or something.
I want to pop in just with one little thing, because it's really interesting watching you talk through these tools, Mark. My wife is in the animation industry, and the old guys, they would sketch out a picture of Mickey Mouse, and then once they get the final, they ink it, right? And then the ladies come in afterwards and do the paint. That's kind of the history, right? When you're in that whiteboard mode, when you're talking with a customer and you put a contract in front of them, there's a signature line. That's a very formal process. It's very established. It's very serious, very unyielding. When you're working on a whiteboard or doing a wireframe in balsamic or something like that, the intent to the audience is, we're just throwing stuff around. We're trying stuff. So it's not it's not we're going to paint ourselves into a corner. No, this is easy to erase. This is easy to draw another line. So to me, that there's something about the process of using visuals and the right medium for it that conveys we're playing in the sandbox right now, not chiseling things in stone, right? We can do that later. Absolutely. By doing the inking and the painting. Here's the final mock-ups or the prototype that we're going to build for you. But in this early stage, it invites people to go, well, what if we did that? Or what if we erase that? If we tried this way? To me, the tool that we use helps encourage collaboration and inventiveness, as opposed to chiseling things and going, oop, that's the way it's got to be.
That's right. I agree 100%. In fact, I find that tension like a more technical version of that for me is like stories on board versus sticky notes on the wall, right? If I'm with a client in a room, I tend to use these sticky notes because they feel temporary. And if I'm with the client on the screen and I start using stories on board, which is obviously a lot more practical than using sticky notes because they can zoom in, they can see them and so on, they can scroll. It feels more permanent. And so I find myself like deliberately going out of my way when I'm doing anything electronic, and deliberately going out of my way when I'm drawing something on the whiteboard, like here on the wall, to scribble when I mean words, to do the kinds of things we've all seen Balsamic and other tools do, like a little squiggle. That means there's some text there. And here's a square, but I don't close the corners of it because I want it to look messy. And I just drew this thing. You're all nodding. Great. I'm going to erase it with my hand right now because I don't want you to think it's precious, even though it was a sketch right in front of me. Right. And the same with stories on board. Like I'll drag the things. I'll delete a card. I'll change the color of it. I'll move a column around. I'll move it back. I want to inject into that process as much of a sense of play and sandboxing is my word, but experimentation as possible. There's a time for more precise drawings. When you get into the Balsamic drawings or you get into the prototyping of interfaces and you want to do a usability test with a user, then you're kind of maybe making things a little more concrete, and you can introduce the sketch style for the lines and things to help things still feel a little bit. That's why those sketch styles exist, right? And make them feel like they're temporary, right? That's why SketchUp has a sketch line mode where it takes your beautiful CAD drawing and turns it into something that looks like it was drawn, using a pencil and a straight edge, right? But I agree. Anything you can do to impress upon your audience the ephemeral nature of the drawings you're created, the purpose of them now versus later, and especially because that makes them clearly different than the network infrastructure diagram you'll create later. or the ERD you might create for version
Right.
1, which is a fair representation of the database structure that will change, and even the network infrastructure will change, but is a snapshot with a date on it that says like a blueprint of our house. A blueprint of my house from 1960 something is an accurate blueprint of what it was when it was built. It has nothing to do with the house I have now because we've remodeled it 2 or 3 times. And so the walls have changed, the windows have changed. I have those drawings. Each of those is a snapshot in time. But all the other sketches in the middle, like that's on yellow paper, on onion skin paper. It's on envelopes and backs of pads. There was a time when we were drawing with Sharpies on the interior walls, which were just wood because we knew they would be covered over and no one would ever see them because they were temporary drawings. And so I think allowing yourself to mix those two impermanent and permanent drawing styles together is really important. Good observation. So tools, sticks and stones, pencils and paper. It's not about mastery, right? I've always been a doodler. I've always been a sketcher. Some of the drawings and sketches you're going to see today will look rougher than others. I don't have it in my office anymore. But when I was going back through my archives of drawings and stuff from all those different hats I wore in the past, I found a huge roll of yellow onion skin paper. I don't even know if it's called that. It's kind of that really thin paper, but it was a really big, tall roll. And it was rolled up, and I rolled it out, and it was about 25 feet long. It was from my architecture time in college, and it was all these drawings and sketches and little thumbnails, and then big drawings with, I colored them in and different views and ideas. And then I would be I was probably on the phone or listening to music, and it was late at night, and I was just scribbling or taking notes or something. And it was just this entire almost timeline of the evolution of this project I did for my thesis. And I designed a theater, and it was in a park, and it was really interesting to me to see just all the different, it was like different perspectives, different scales, different styles, different levels of detail. And you're going to see here, you don't let perfect be the enemy of good. You're not aiming for perfect. These 2 drawings right here in the middle, my wife Sally's got a variety of tattoos, and I've drawn several of them. And she wanted one with a heart and an arrow because of a friend of hers that she had lost, and she really wanted something to commemorate her. And I was trying to understand what she wanted. No, it's just this. And I was like, well, how about this? How about this? And so this is just a tiny slice of what was like 4 or 5 pages of me trying to capture the style of the heart, the angle and the roundness of the style, the incorporation of the arrow. This was just a few examples, and it was just loop, loop, loop. And eventually I got to a version of it where I did a lot of erasing and a lot of drawing, and to get to a point where I was like, this is pretty close to what you want. But it was probably the 50th iteration of that little thumbnail sketch that eventually turned into, a tattoo that the tattoo artist evolved a little bit further as well. The top left is me writing a whole bunch of client codes and a whole bunch of industries, and then trying to give some thumbs up and thumbs down. Ideal customers, are these the kinds of industries you want to go into? These are not meant to indicate if we like customers, we love all our customers or most of them, but this is mostly like, do we see opportunity in this market, or is this a tough market to sell into? Is there more clients here that are ideal for us, or are there fewer? And so again, it was a way for us to develop shared understanding as a sales and marketing team as to what were we going after. Stories on board, paper style, right? This is a skeleton key. How do we receive? It's our version of the IT workflow. How do we receive inbounds? What do we do with them? This line, I wanted to bring this up earlier when Bob was talking about stories on board, and someone asked about, putting quotes together and MVPs. This is a really interesting piece of those storyboarding techniques. I highly recommend User Story Mapping. I think it's by Jeff Patton. If I'm not remembering the name of the author, please someone chime in and correct me, especially in the chat so people can find it. But it's a seminal book we read before we started using story mapping and then stories on board as a tool. But this idea of like, you have all your flow and your requirements and other things about up above. And then of course there's okay, that's everything. What are we actually going to build first? And you just draw a line and you pull down the most important things. And you create a swim lane of MVP or V1. And then you can go back to the top and you can pull down items for V2, and you can just keep making lines and pulling things down. And it gives you an ability to start with the everything and then kind of segment into layers of what you're going to do. But you can see we had all kinds of little notes. We turned things on an angle to communicate to everyone in the room that this was really important, or this was something we needed to dig into some more. I've seen versions of storyboards like this, and even in, I don't know if you can do it in Stories on Board, where we've taken an actual, report, from a client, and we pasted it right there over that column so that the artifact that is associated with that workflow is right there, visible and available to us in a very, accessible way. These are drawings for one of the sets I mentioned that I did for, I think it was Small Craft Warnings by Tennessee Williams, showing kind of the rough ideation that was going on with me after talking to the director, and the eventual encapsulation of that into a more precise set of drawings for actually building it with a couple of particular items that were shown. So very different stages of the very same project, and a lot of scribbling with pen that I couldn't erase. There's obviously the digital world, right? So this is all drawn stuff or physical stuff. Now we're getting into all the tools, right? There's a lot of turnover. I think, Bob, you mentioned at least 2 different note-taking tools you've taken. I've used 4 different tools for ERDs and topology diagrams over the years. Some of that has to do with the ones that survive, and some of it has to do with the pricing of those and the scalability and the shareability, and there's all kinds of reasons to keep changing. I recommend master the basics in the material world. Get super good with a whiteboard. If you don't have a whiteboard that's available, get one of those ones I showed you that you can carry with you that's no bigger than a portfolio. That's super powerful to be able to take that into an office and say, you don't have a whiteboard? You don't have a conference room? Fine. And just pop it up on the desk, and now you can draw. Maybe you're more comfortable doing it on your iPad, but I like a little bit of elbow room when I do that. Even just having a graph paper pad, or having a plain white pad, or just some blank paper that you can sketch on, can be a really powerful thing when you're meeting with the client. And if you get good and comfortable doing basic, ugly, not so square shapes and lines and drawings there, I think then it's okay to graduate into other more technical tools, where I think we all know it's real easy when you're working with more technical tools to get sucked into perfection mode, right? I gotta line things up, I have to make them parallel, I want to get them consistently spaced. I know every time I did an ERD or a drawing in OmniGraffle, I got all caught up in grids and alignments and stuff. And when I drew it on the whiteboard, I didn't really care how ugly the ERD was. All that mattered is that it was like legible, right? Period. None of my squares were square, none of them were the same size. I'd get in here and I'd be like, oh, the font is wrong, and all these other unnecessary details. So a little bit closer view of an example of story mapping with stories on board. An example of a drawing, a balsamic of a contact detail pop-up, user interface. An even simpler drawing, I think, Don, Draw.io of a prototype interface to show a customer an example, again, of something done in OmniGraffle. All the different kinds of technical tools, whether it's Visio, Stories on Board, Draw.io, Balsamic, whatever your favorite, great. But again, I can't emphasize enough, they are not where I'd start. Start with paper, start with whiteboards, keep it simple. You might find that's more than enough. Certainly less expensive, super portable. And the only place it's hard to use that is maybe when you're in a meeting, unless you have a tablet and you're really good with Zoom and the whiteboard. So in closing, a couple of strange turn resources. If you've never read Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud, I can't recommend it enough. I bring that up not just because I've been a comic reader since the first time I could read, and to this day when I can, whether it's the funnies in the newspaper or it's an actual particular comic I like in a series. This book unpacks visual language in a way that's super accessible. It talks about the evolution, obviously, of comics and going from static images and drawings as a human all the way back to the early days of drawing on the cave walls to now. But it does so in the context of comics and gets into things about how we communicate sequence and story and impact and action and emphasis and things. And all of the things that he talks about are applicable to the work we do. And almost all of them are done by hand. So it really kind of makes you start to realize that even a quick set of pencil sketches that you do really quickly, that he thinks of as panels in a comic telling a story of someone like being at a party and then getting into a car and then crashing into a tree and then stumbling home, is, just 4 little thumbnail drawings. And that's not much different than having 4 different screen drawings side by side that show the empty form, the filled in form, the routing of it, and then the email that prints out at the end. Like, it starts to make you realize that this is not a new thing that we're doing. We're just bringing old tools and methods into our practice. Now, the other end of the spectrum, an older book, if you've ever read anything by Edward Tufte, is a series of books on visualizing information and envisioning information. These are deep books, but they are really seminal books when it comes to the idea of trying to communicate things visually. he's got a whole series of books that get into like data analysis and ways to express things graphically to communicate complex ideas. I've got a whole bunch of other things. If you go to, I can send this afterwards to David to share it out. But on the speaker's notes for this page, I've got another 7 or 8 references here to other books, other websites, which I found really useful as I prepared this and that I've referred to over time, that are a good place to also just kind of get your noodle going around this topic. I think you can download the PDF with the speaker's notes from the community site if you go and find the video under the design section, but I'll make sure I share them here as well. Maybe copy and paste in a minute here once I stop sharing. That is the end of my slide deck.
Nice work, Mark.
Thank you.
You know, one of the other things too that I'm always reminded by when you get to know your FileMaker colleagues, you know, you look in the room around us, there are so many of us that came from, yourself included, came from creative industries, right? Came from visual or music or performance or any of those types of things. And, you know, it strikes me that the people who grow up wanting to be Oracle engineers probably don't come from the same path that your traditional FileMaker developer comes from. So having this sort of conversation with people who are really ones and zeros guys is probably a lot different. I think us as FileMaker developers, a lot of us already have that sort of, that visualization, that creativity bug in us. You know what I mean? So I think we strive and desire to do these visualizations, where I have absolutely met, you know, counterparts at clients who want the 14 levels of indentation, everything documented to the nth degree in a technical specification, and that people can get lost in those weeds. So I think it's I think number one, I think we as a group like these kinds of things, and you've done a really fantastic job bringing them up.
Thank you.
Do we have any?
Thank you, Marty. Vellum. Thank you, Marty.
Oh yeah,
I think Vellum is the Vellum's for the pretty stuff. I think the yellow stuff is also, it's like the cheaper Vellum because you're going to just rip it up and throw it away.
Yeah.
There
we go.
David, can I say something?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. Mark, awesome work. Really love it. I wanted to share a story that we probably remember in the community. Heather Winkle getting up on stage and sharing her journey into architecture. And, you know, she was so proud of her model. And modeling in architecture is like sketching, like a little bit, like you're a little bit more advanced. Like you build a model, you take a lot of time to build a model. Anyway, she told the story of like how she was so proud of this model that she built, and the teacher came over and smashed it, and she was like devastated. And he said something that I guess burned it into her, this idea that don't get attached to your first model. Like, don't get attached to your first idea. It's ideation. It's like it continues to grow, it continues to evolve. And with what you shared today, Mark, it's really an emphasis or a reminder of that evolution that we continue to kind of, you know, call out with our clients and our work that we do. So I just wanted to share that, and thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
I want to give a shout out to yellow sticky notes. Every data structure I've designed for the last 20 years has started with yellow sticky notes. And when you don't have a whiteboard, you generally have a window. You just go over to the door wall or the window and start with the sticky notes, and there you go. So visualization is the first part of every project for us.
I did that's really a good point, Lynn. Years ago, I did a little bit called Cribs, where I got to interview 5 or 6 FileMaker developers and how they work and what their environment was and so forth. And, you know, so I was John Sindelar and Chiyoko and Todd Geist and others, and Bob Shockey and some others. And I was always tickled because Todd, you know, Todd's got his whole place set up like a broadcast studio because he's doing so many webinars at the time. But in the back, in the other wall, his closet doors were replaced with whiteboards. Like he literally had sliding, I think it was sliding closet doors that were whiteboards. Because when he was thinking through stuff, I don't even think this was for customer facing. I think just for him, I want to go over there and so forth. And, you know, guess what? We got whiteboards all over our office for any number of things. But yeah, it's really interesting to see how other people scratch it out on paper, chisel it into mock-ups, prototypes, all that sort of stuff. The other thing too, when we were talking about requirements gathering, I think we all know, and we all say this in the sales process and in the initial kickoff of those requirements meeting, we want buy-in from the decision makers. Those are the guys with the cigars and the big wallets, and they're not going to get into the weeds of this. So we got to talk about what the goals are. You get a nice picture that conveys, again, 1,000 words, so that the big cheese is going, yep, I like that. He doesn't have to get his brain all the way into the minutia of this. So it's sort of like a nice polite off-ramp for, you can have two sets of goals. These are all the text stuff that the project managers need to read and understand completely. But if you have some really good, clear storyboards and things of that nature, it also allows the brass on the organizations that you're working with to be able to get their arms around it, see that it's going to be good, and give it a green light. So it also just helps from a sales process to have good visualization tools, because the people who have to say yes better understand what they're spending the money on.
Yeah, I've created a drawing that I'm going to share with you guys. One slide on another presentation. I'm going to share this drawing with the hope that no one else steals this drawing. I don't think it's that great, but I'm intending to put it into a blog post to kind of share it, because I think it is a way that I've explained to my team and to my customers why it's important not just to build a system once, but to continuously improve your systems over time. And I don't think it's a perfect visual. I haven't sat down and tried to polish it, but I think it's a good rough example of a visual. So let me just share it really quickly and I'll talk you through it. But I think it's exactly what you're saying here, Dave, about these tools don't only have to be for your solutions, they can also be for your sales process. So in this image, the top line, the red line, is workflow. And the bottom line is the systems, tools, technologies, whatever it is that's in place, paper, all the way up to ERPs and accounting systems. And when we meet clients, their workflow is here and their systems are here, and there's a mismatch, right? There's that misfit technologies, scattered information, the ad hoc processes, all the stuff that Claris has talked about. And they spend some money and time with us to close that gap and make some kind of harmony. And in doing so, the workflow changes. And in doing so, their systems change, right? We introduce new things, we change the way they work. And things are great, and there's harmony. And then we might, as I have historically done, let time pass and benignly neglect that client. And then there's a drift. Their workflow starts to change. Their systems start to change. There's a gap, a new gap. And then they spend money and they close the gap again, and there's harmony, and so on, and so on, and so on. And I created this as a series of diagrams. You can see some of the other ones here referenced below, where I was trying to impress to my team the value to the client of having a continuous engagement with a developer on whatever cadence makes sense, but a continuous engagement to ensure that we get ahead of those changes, that we are in lockstep with those, so that just like your lawnmower needs to have the fluids flushed, and just like your gutters, if you live in a place where there's lots of trees and rain, that they get emptied every year, if you don't maintain it, it will degrade, and the investments you've made previously will lose their value, that everything falls apart. You have to keep putting a little bit in just to keep that flywheel going, to keep the value there. And so that's why I think, some kind of recurring engagement with clients is valuable to not just us for stability, but to them, so that the thing that they bought retains its value over time and keeps being valuable 10 years later, and doesn't 5 years from now become the new thing that is hanging around their neck.
That's a great way, not just to stay relevant, but to sit there and say, you've got a $50,000 car. If it's parked at the side of the road, it's going to get rusty. The tires are going to go flat. It's no longer a $50,000 car, right? So from that standpoint, you're talking about the erosion of a system over time by not giving it this attention. And that attention is proactive, so you can sit there and go, yes, I'm changing the oil because I should, but you're also extending the life of this thing that you spent all this time and money in, right? So that's a really great approach.
But my favorite part of that is that I've made 3 or 4 sketches and I've showed those to several clients, and it's like they get the light bulbs, they get it. They get why I'm not just selling them on something. They can now visualize and understand what's going to happen in the future, because I've shown them something that communicates the sense of time passing and a future state that they can't predict verbally, and they don't believe me when I say it, but then they see it and they're like, oh, you know, I actually can see that now. Now that I'm seeing it on a timeline, I get it.
Especially if you've got, you know, one or two customer stories that map to that graph of yours, to sit there and go, Acme, and we built this thing and it did great. And then in their industry, there was this change that required X, and that we saw this separation and we got in front of it and we pulled them back down together. Telling a few stories like that and using some real case studies from existing customers can also help that resonate real well. Wow, this is a great meeting. We got to kind of close things off. Number one, thanks for everybody for coming, especially you know, to Steve, Dina, Bob. Thanks for your help in putting together some of the content for the panel and your involvement. And again, kudos to Mr. Chris Moyer for his work on the newsreel of the day. And especially thank you again to Mark. I'm really glad to have you here. Love to see you in future meetings at some point. But thanks for your dedication on this. That's been fantastic.
Thanks for the invite. It's my pleasure.
Great. Okay, everybody, have a good weekend. Stay safe, and we'll see you next month. Jonathan will probably have some announcements on his meeting coming up in the coming weeks, but we look forward to seeing you then.
All right. Thanks a lot, Dave.
Thanks, Dave.
Thanks, everybody.